listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty. Good morning, everybody. It is September 28th this morning. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern, and we have headlines. Let's get into them. First up in COVID news, about 195,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also 2,380 deaths reported. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 118,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 33% from the average 2 weeks earlier. We'd gotten into double-digit decreases for the last couple of available days, back on Friday, Monday, today, but 33% is up. Let's hope it keeps up, because that will bring the cases further down. Tautologically, 55% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,100,000 people across the United States and killed 690,558 people here in the U.S. Pfizer-BioNTech has started large-scale testing of a new oral drug for COVID-19 prevention. The pill is designed to block key receptors the virus needs to duplicate, allowing the body to fight the original source. The pill is designed as a preventative measure for those believing they have been exposed but are not ill yet. As Bob Schlehuber over at Political Misfits describes it, this is like a COVID Plan B medication. In national news, Senate Republicans sank the short-term government funding debt limit bill. Congress is 72 hours away from a potential shutdown in order to pass this before that happens. Democrats are now expected to strip the bill of raising the debt limit in order to get it passed. President Biden received his third dose of the COVID-19 vaccine yesterday, taking the booster shot manufactured by Pfizer-BioNTech. This comes after an FDA panel recommended the shots for people ages 65 and older or those at high risk or in high transmissibility jobs. R&B ultra star R. Kelly has been convicted of sex trafficking after nearly 3 decades of the alleged crime. He married then 15-year-old Aliyah Dana Houghton in 1994. Prosecutors proved that the actions of managers and aides who helped Kelly meet more girls amounted to a criminal enterprise. Several women testified in the trial, saying they were subjected to perverse and sadistic whims while they were underage. In international news, the head of one of Afghanistan's largest banks said that the sector was near collapse. Speaking from Dubai, while in Afghanistan itself, the banks are the sites of repeated runs by anxious members of the public looking to withdraw funds. With more withdrawals than contributions and a dwindling ability to pay out the withdrawals, the chief executive of the Islamic Bank of Afghanistan warned of an existential crisis, quote, end quote. Climate activists in the city of Milan, meanwhile, beat war drums against older generations for failing to avert climate change. Speakers there included Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, alongside hundreds of other predominantly young attendees. And in Earth and Science news, a fireball passed over the East Coast last night, traveling over 32,000 miles an hour. Fireballs are a level 2 wizard spell in Dungeons & Dragons, the original edition. I'm just kidding. Fireballs are another name for meteors that are so bright they illuminate more than Venus, the brightest planet in our solar system. After traveling 26 miles in Earth's atmosphere, it is disintegrated after its course. It burn out, basically. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl, did you ever play tabletop role-playing games?
No, actually, no. I always played chess. That was my
That was your thing.
Yeah, but you know, mean like Dungeons and Dragons or
Dungeons and Dragons, GURPS. There's a whole motley crew of them.
No, I've never heard of that one.
Generic universal role-playing system.
No, I knew about them, but no, never necessarily played them. There was another one I thought that was really popular. They used to have this gaming center in Richmond on
Warhammer 40K? Warhammer, the one with like all the little pieces on the table?
Okay, maybe that might have been it. Because they used to have those, like the little tournaments and stuff like that there. They also, was it Pokemon? When I used to work at Books A Million as a barista, they used to have tournaments.
Oh yeah, trading with the trading, like the original card game. Yeah. And then there were all these like other different card games. Pokemon was really the main one, but there was like Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, still immensely popular at this point, like crazy popular. If you look at the valuations of the cards, actually, like an art collection business at this point.
Yeah, but I've never played, but yeah, they used to be pretty popular. I mean, like I said, they used to come in and have tournaments like Saturdays or something like that, and kids would have their cards. They would trade those cards, and I remember it, but no, never played it.
And neither did I really. I played like a couple of my stepdad. So my parents divorced. Mom remarried, of course. Stepdad had played those things when he was a teen, so he had like all these old books that he brought into the house, and I would read through those.
Yeah,
and we played a couple of games, but mostly I would just read them. I just fantasize, oh, I could be a druid, I could be a ranger, whatever. You know what I mean? I didn't really have anybody to play with, so I would just like play with my imagined world or whatever. I'd live out these things, but never really got to play them.
I always thought the power sets were cool. I mean, because basically, each card had a power into itself.
Well, that's slightly different. That's slightly different. Those are the card, and I don't need to get too deep into it. Now we're getting into nerd. But the basic division, with card games like you're talking about, each card represents like a resource or an object
or like a defense or an offense.
Exactly, those kinds of things. Whereas tabletop role-playing games, these are the ones, they'll have like a character sheet, which is just your character, and then most of it's in your imagination. Okay. No cards involved for the most part. You'll have like these books that you'll reference. Some of them are more mathy, where you have to rely on tables. Others are just more like imaginatory, where you don't do as much math. Anyway,
interesting. Okay, okay.
I brought that up because of the Fireball reference. That's all. It was just a quick segue, and now we can get back into your official scheduled news here. If we want to talk headlines, I'll go to this one first. We're going to be talking about this, of course, later on in the show. I'll read the headline again. Senate Republicans sank the short-term government funding debt limit bill. That leaves us just 72 hours away from a potential shutdown. Yep. What do you think is going to happen here, Jamarl?
Well, if it's up to Republicans, they're not gonna go with it. I mean, like McConnell seems very serious about not supporting and backing up the bills that they've already paid for. I mean, it's somewhat of a betrayal. And I guess it's a betrayal on two fronts for the party itself and members. But on this one specifically, it is his constitutional duty to protect the full faith and credit of the United States. And it wasn't a situation where Democrats were the only ones putting these bills out. This was both. He is conflating let's say the budgeting coming up in the future with stuff that they've already done in the past. And now at this one, he's like, yeah, we're not going to touch that. We're not going to pay for it. Well, it seems like they're perfectly willing to let it collapse. And, the catch becomes, does he really think that the public is not going to blame the entirety of Congress for something like that? I mean, because we already got, we got hit once before where they've increased the interest rates on the money that we pay on the loans and stuff like that. Well, they did that because it didn't seem like the government had the capacity to basically do basic things like pay the bills that it's incurred. And so, yeah, it's pretty rich that he's going to do this, considering they raised it like 3 times under Trump. And to make it worse, when Obama was in office and they were doing this stuff, I remember they was like, oh, we won't raise another penny on my grandkids, life or something like that. And then immediately when Trump won, they raised about like $8 trillion, some insane amount. So, yeah, I mean, the catch becomes, does the Democratic Party by themselves have enough to pass it? Meaning, can they do this without a filibuster? Because if they required a filibuster, or if the Republicans filibuster it, then yeah, they don't have any options in regards to doing it. And so, I don't know. I mean, my thought is, it seems like as if the Republican Party is serious about letting the budget tank, or to let the debt ceiling get hit. But I don't know. It would be a catastrophe, at least from my understanding, from everyone that said something about it. But
what would happen? Say that happens. What's the do?
Well, basically, it comes across as the United States can't pay its bills. So immediately you're going to have what? You're going to have interest rates spike. That was one of the main things. And the amount of money that the United States pays on the debt is going to basically dramatically increase going forward. You may even have distrust from either other countries or other financial institutions in the way that the United States operates its financial affairs. But they consider it to be basically undermining the, quote, full faith and credit of the United States. And if that happens, it's somewhat of a, I don't know, I've heard people talk about it as if it's a catastrophe. And I remember during the time, Republicans were like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It'll just, we'll we just need to reorganize our thing, and it would make us be more honest in regards to paying. That stuff is nonsense. It's stuff that they've already appropriated the money for. Like Congress comes up and says, okay, we want to give this money for COVID. Great. Well, the bill is now due, and they're like, yeah, we don't want to touch that. We're not going to touch that. We're just going to leave it up to to Democrats to do it. And again, I don't even know if Democrats have the power in and of themselves to do it, which makes it even that much dicier. So I don't know. At the very least, the amount of money that we're going to be paying on our debt is going to dramatically increase.
Well, let's get into it for a second. Will you permit me an allegory here?
Go for it.
Thank you. So let's just take it as a couple. And to be PC, let's switch the genders. So you have the Democrats are the sort of the strong woman here who wants to be financially, fiscally stable. And the Republicans are the pardon me. Let's get back into this. The Democrats are the wasteful, very profligate, overly spendy man in the relationship, gendered relationship. And the Republicans are the strong woman who doesn't want the man to spend all of her money, all the money that she's made, basically. But they've made this money together. They're deep into this thing. Wouldn't the breaking the debt ceiling, wouldn't we just want a declaration of national bankruptcy at a certain point? Isn't that the more sensible decision for the one partner in the marriage to make? If they're in this relationship where the other party, playing devil's advocate here, just keeps spending their money, keeps getting them overcommitted, keeps getting them into these things. I mean, this is the problem with MMT, or at least one of them, right? If you print out a bunch of money and then you don't have the political power to get legislative bills through, that will tax that money out of the system. If you're creating a bunch of money and you're not removing it from the system, and you're going into a bunch of debt to yourself on a national level and to other countries, and this is where it all gets confused. How does that work in the long run? If from an MMT perspective, they're just creating more money. They're not able to actually politically get that money out of the system, if you see what I'm saying. They're not able to tax it out by introducing bills like we're seeing with this one that would tax it out at a higher level. That seems like that might work in a perfect political system, but not in a fairly poorly functioning one like we have. And coming back to the idea of this being a couple, it's they're together, they're having to make these choices together, but they are pulling in drastically different tendencies, and they're both having to live with the worst excesses of their own decisions, and they're mutually dependent. They're in a codependent relationship where the one thing that gives them power at this point is vilifying the other in their own mind. The one way that the Democrats can truly get reelected is to paint Republicans as demons. The same thing with the Republicans, right? Yeah. There's I feel like there's something to this allegory, even though I botched it kind of at the beginning.
I would say somebody who's backs MMT would probably make the argument that as the government can spend, providing their real resources to back the money that they're spending. So let's take an analogy for school. Let's say everybody can go to school. Whoever it is, everybody can go to school. Well, immediately you're going to have position in regards to people who need spots. You're going to need desks. You're going to need books. You might need wood. And at a certain point, if those things aren't available, you're going to get inflation and the price is going to increase for it. The argument that MMTers will probably make is, as long as you have real resources to represent the cash that you're putting into the system itself, then you don't necessarily have an issue. The issue comes in when you don't have that continuity, where that continuity is so radically broken. Like somebody spends $100 trillion, and it's like, why are you doing that? You know what I mean? If there's nothing to correlate that to, then it becomes issues. As for the demonization of the other party, that's one way of getting elected, I suppose, as the lowest common denominator. But keep in mind, back in, let me see, for 50 years or more, the Democratic Party had won the House of Representatives with the exception of 2 terms. I mean, it was only when Bill Clinton got in office and he started taking these kind of right-wing policies where that basically ended. But for 50 years, with the exception of Leah, twice, they held the party, meaning it's not just a demonization of the other party. That's one way of doing it, and that's one way of kind of getting this race to the bottom. But you also just delivering for your population where they're saying, yes, these guys are representing my interests, or these guys are delivering for, I don't know, my particular interests. Well, that's also another way to do it. That's just the way that they haven't been doing it for God knows how long, and they've basically doubled down on, that guy's horrible, Donald Trump is the worst thing since, whatever.
Well, that's what they're cutting a cycle doing, and I don't see how they're going to get out of it, which is why, a codependent...
Yes, how do they extricate themselves from that?
Codependent couple, that the only thing that's holding them together now is their hatred for each other and their long habit of hating each other That's what it is, right?
Oh, and here's the other part.
I mean, but just to be clear, you were putting all that stuff out a minute ago as like, that's how it should work. There are alternatives. But practically, we're stuck in this rut, right?
What do you mean?
We're stuck in the rut with each party only vilifying the other party.
Oh, I don't know if we're stuck in the rut.
Well,
I mean, when you say stuck in the rut, what do you mean? It's impossible to get out of it? Or what is it? I don't know what you mean by stuck in the rut.
It would be an immense uphill slog to escape the rut. It is a deep rut that we are deeply in.
It kind of depends. I mean, I don't see anytime soon of them changing that tact of that guy is horrendous and that guy is going to end the world. Like, that doesn't seem like that's changing anytime soon. By the same token, it can be augmented with this kind of economic plan that Biden is trying to put out. The catch becomes, though, they're trying to even get it just through their own members, well, at the very least in the Senate, at least 2 of the members. And so, I don't know. I mean, there's a potential for them to kind of reorient the ship. But keep in mind, even if they reoriented the ship from the standpoint of putting out policy, they're still going to go with that guy's evil, that guy's, the devil incarnate, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I don't necessarily see that demonization thing changes anytime soon.
That's what I'm saying. We're stuck in that rut. And here's the thing. You say that the bill would solve it. I don't think that it would. The Republicans...
I don't think I said solved it.
Oh, pardon me. A bill like this one would make it a lot better or something?
At the very least, it would give people... Right, yeah. Because I think it would, at the very least, give people this take of... this is something that is in my wallet that these guys did. Meaning you can associate, okay, the party did X.
Yeah.
As opposed to for the last X number of years, you could not do that at all. And so I think that would be different. I mean, part of the reason that a lot of people who are Black, Hispanic, et cetera, and poor are pulled out of the political process is because they believe that it didn't matter. That, whichever one of these guys gets in, doesn't matter. Ultimately, they're going to lie. They're going to say whatever they have to say to promise, and they're going to get in office and do whatever they do. And people get dejected from that. Like, nobody wants to be consistently lied to. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even vote. Obama was the last Democrat I voted for. And it was part of the reason was because it was like, all right, this is nonsense. This wasn't hope and change, despite the fact that he would hit that bell as hard as he could. And even when he got out of office, he was trying to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the public was like, yeah, we don't want you to do that. And letting homeowners go bust. Even the thing in Flint, Michigan, where they were basically had lead in the water, and Obama goes there and basically not chastises, but mocks the people who are there. It was like one thing after another in that administration. I was like, yeah, I'm done. And so I don't think I was alone in that. I think a lot of people end up in that spot. So the catch becomes, how do you bring people back into this mindset that, okay, this politics is not one of those things where politics does matter. Or, okay, I can put my finger on something that these guys did that relates to me and my wallet, et cetera.
Yeah, there was another thing, because we were talking about this bill on the government shutdown, which relates to the whole debt ceiling conversation, which is a looming thing over the $3.5 trillion bill that's ultimately the subject of a lot of hoopla at this point. And
by the way, this is Washington Post. The economic scenario is cataclysmic. The downturn would be comparable to that suffered during the financial crisis in 2008. Based on a report written by Zandi Burros and Yaros. Let's see. It also makes the point that stocks will basically be cut in half. Rates will spike as investors have a higher demand a higher return for the risk taking.
That wasn't so bad. I've got fond days thinking back to 2008. I'm kind of not even kidding, if I'm being honest with you.
I mean, but
I was 16 years old, Jamarl. That was a great time in my life.
Was it?
No, I'm just kidding. But
yeah, they were just, they're considering cataclysmic. I remember back during the other time where they were like, I can't believe they're going to do this. I can't believe they're going to do this. It seems like McConnell is serious at this point, though. I mean, it's almost as if initially the thought was in their head, and then it took them a while to get familiar with the thought and accustomed to the thought, and now they're like, yep, let's do it. But I mean, the consequences are going to be insane that they're going to do this.
Well, I don't know, maybe, but sometimes you need to bite those kinds of bullets. Like, I'll put it like this. If I could instantly solve a lot of my problems just by going through a 3-month depression, the worst depression of my life, and I knew I could make it through it, I'd probably do that. I'd probably bite that bullet. Similarly, if we have a long-term economic malaise caused by misguided decisions by the legislature and in some cases by the executive, then maybe we should stop making those decisions.
Well, why are they doing it?
Well, that's the thing. There are at least 2 reasons here. One is they're playing political games and they're using the debt ceiling as the queen on the board, not just the pawn. They've moved it all the way across the board to the point where it's now a queen. 2 is there is an actual thing there. The debt ceiling means something and we don't want to go too deep into debt. And maybe, probably in my opinion, it's a combination of the two, where there are plenty of Republicans who have genuine, heartfelt belief we shouldn't do this kind of thing, but also everybody's best interest when they're in power, when the Republicans are in power, specifically when a guy like Donald Trump is in power, and we're going through a thing like this, he's going to spend a lot of money, just like the Democrats would.
Yeah.
But broadly, Republicans seem to be the ones, except for bailing up big banks and paying a lot to the military-industrial complex, they seem to be the ones who are more like, let's spend less money. And if money, if going through a depression is a real thing, then money is a real thing, right? And if money is a real thing, then understanding the amount of it in the system, like MMT, it gets into this fanciful territory. Well, we can just print as much as we want, and we can make it happen. It's like this utopian naivety that seems to land in bad places.
Yeah, they would disagree with that. I mean, like I said, the issue is real resources versus the other way around. They would probably be pretty significant with hitting on that point.
But like I said earlier, if you can't tax the money out of the system, the whole MMT supposition, they're like the paradigm shift that they brought into the modern modern economic conversation seems to be money is created by the government. It's printed into existence and then it's taxed out of existence. Well, it is now, but it's printed into existence and it's taxed out of existence. And that's like, oh, it's mind blowing. And then, well, what happens if you can't tax it out of existence because you have political battles at the highest levels that keep you from taxing it out of existence? Don't you just get more and more money in the system, circulating in the system, which leads to inflation? Like that's an obvious political reality that economic group of people, I would want to hear what they have to say about it. Maybe we should bring somebody on to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We can bring on Steve. But I'm telling you what they're going to say. They're going to basically say, as long as the real resources exist, the government makes its own cash, et cetera, et cetera.
Do they, though?
Et cetera.
Productivity in the States, a lot of unemployment's pretty high. We're not producing all that much. What real resources are they even talking about here in the States?
Well, I mean, it's real resources.
Yeah, but
your government,
so
your
much
system.
money.
Well, I get that. But your system has to basically have the amount to accommodate whatever you're doing with the money.
And do we, or is it just fictional at this point? Do we have, and with all the tens of trillions of dollars?
The United States still has the largest economy on the planet, despite the fact that it's somewhat of a difficult go of it. And yeah, I mean, it depends on how much it is. It's kind of an X and Y equation. It's not necessarily a flat thing.
I get it, but I'll put it like this. We've printed out a lot of money in the last year or two. We have not produced a consummate amount of resources. Like, look around, tell me where you see them popping up, if you will. And yet, inflation, we're seeing some inflation. I don't know. The equation doesn't make sense. I feel like there is sleight of hand being performed. I don't understand it fully. That means that the MMT theories are not comprehensive and that the crucial failures, the things that they're not seeing, might be important for us to.
Are traditional economic theories comprehensive?
I don't know. I don't know economics well enough. I think broadly any science can't be comprehensive. But MMT has picked up a big cult following, and it seems to have permeated a lot of how people think about money. We can just spend more. We can just spend more.
Yeah.
And then the Republican, really the libertarian pushback is, well, no, we can't. And that seems like that is a splash of cold water to the face that seems like it might be good and even needed. I don't know.
I would say that Republican administrations often spend more and be less frugal with the money. If you go back and look at Bush, if you go back look at some of the other ones, what is it, Bush, Trump, they spend tons of cash. The talking point about, the debt, that's a talking point. It's what they use to try to constrain activity, and they use that as a hit point.
I would buy that political actors are hypocrites, but when you're talking about models of how money works, it's like, well, no, there's a floor there. There's a reality there. Whether they're willing to betray it when it's in their political interest doesn't change the fact that there's a floor there.
Well, I do think there's reality there based on the resources of a particular government and what that country needs.
And it's dwindling here in the States, right?
Well, what's dwindling?
Our political ability to get anything done, to produce things, to govern.
That has already, that's been shot for decades at this point.
And yet we're printing more and more money at a faster rate than ever. And that's the critical point.
But again, it depends on what it's for. I mean, for the COVID thing, for example, do you believe that they shouldn't have done anything for COVID? They should have just let it ride?
That's a lot more complicated. If I were in charge of the government, I would have probably tried to replace the FDA and the CDC like a decade or two ago, specifically the FDA. But really, there should be talk right now about replacing the CDC. Look at our death rate. Why is there not any conversation about that? Anyway, I'd start a couple of years back when it comes to COVID, ideally, and I'd be like, hey, this pandemic thing, this threat of a pandemic is one of the major threats facing any country going forward. If you look historically, economic depressions have brought countries under, but so have plagues. Therefore, in a broad sense, to be prepared, we should make sure we can handle
so with
this
everything
kind
else
of
that was
thing.
going on at the time, you'd have been like, you know what? Let's deal with a potential plague.
Why are you defending the status quo
No,
for
I'm
failing
asking
to
you,
do it?
is that what you're willing to do? You're saying that
Yes.
you were like, a few years ago, I would have totally been like, despite the fact that there was nothing else going on
Did
about
China
a plague.
do it? Has China been able to do that despite everything they've had going on?
Shane, I'm going by what you just said.
And
you
why are you
said
attacking me
that
for
if you were
it?
back
Isn't
in the
that the right
past,
decision?
you said if you were back in the past, you would make this decision to do the plague stuff. I'm making a point to you that it's farcical, and I don't believe you.
You asked me what I would do, and now you're saying, no, Shane,
Because
you
you're
wouldn't
saying
do
you're
that.
going back in
You
time
wouldn't
to
be
do it.
wise enough.
You are saying you're going back in time to do
You're
it.
putting me up and you're attacking me. It's
Shane,
dumb, Jamarl.
nobody is attacking you.
Well, but that's literally what you did. You're like, what would you do? And you're like, no, you couldn't do it, Shane.
Would you like some
couldn't do
wine
that.
with that cheese?
I would
Or
love
that cheese with that wine?
I would love some.
Cry more. Cry more.
What are you talking about?
Shane,
Jamarl,
I
you're
asked
just
you,
being bitter.
what would you do about what was going on? You said
I told you.
would go back in time and
you asked me then what would I do?
No, I asked you what would you do about this? Would you have spent money on dealing with the pandemic? You said that was a difficult thing.
Okay, whatever.
Okay, I mean, hey, we have producers. We can have them to pull up the tape if you need to pull up the tape.
Dude, I listen to the show every day.
I would be perfectly willing to wait and go back and listen to that comment.
Okay.
Perfectly willing.
All right.
Anything else?
Well, I don't get why you're on this level, man.
Dude, I don't know why you're on this level. You're crying about being attacked and nobody's attacking you.
Dude, anybody who's literally watching the video
just repeated what
why do you
said.
keep going deeper and deeper into this thing, Jamarl? Why do you keep
why
okay,
are you
let's
crying
just what
about this?
Dude,
why are you crying about this? You're an adult.
I will speak so as to allow the listeners who can't see my face to realize that I'm not crying. But Jamarl, you're just repeatedly attacking me over at this point.
Nobody's attacking you. And you can use that as a a rhetorical point.
Wait,
you're just
this is now for over a minute. This is bad radio. Let's do a pattern interrupt. I'm going to take us into a brief break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, I suppose we'll be talking about R. Kelly.
Ideally.
With Cordell Woodland. Austin, do you want to join us for this conversation? Yeah. All right. Probably just Cordell Woodland then. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And joining us, Cordell Woodland. He's our producer at Fault Lines. And we're going to have a conversation about the R. Kelly verdict. So R. Kelly, of course, history of, I don't know what else to call it, pedophilia, messing with women who are 15, 16, etc. And he's been doing this for decades. We mentioned about the Aaliyah thing where she was basically 15 years old and he ended up marrying her. Have zero idea how he was able to pull that off and walk with that. And it finally has come due. Back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, there were several charges against R. Kelly dealing with, porn for minors or minor porn. Well, he was able to escape on those charges. This time around, the prosecutor built a significant case, and that case was based on racketeering, right here. 8 counts of violating an anti-sex trafficking law and racketeering. And that's what he was basically found guilty of. The sentencing phase is going to be coming up in a few months. And so it is unclear what he's going to get, but R. Kelly could be in prison for life at this point. So I guess the question is, what does this mean? For me, I look at this and say, about time. I mean, R. Kelly has been doing this for decades, and it's this open secret that everybody knew about. Like, it wasn't a situation where nobody knew that R. Kelly was doing this. I've heard people make the comment that says, you can have a room with 100 people in it. There's one kid in there that's 15 years old, and R. Kelly will find that one 15-year-old girl. Like, that's how bad it is, and that's what I mean when I say they knew. And this doesn't even get into the weird stuff, like having women, you know, not allowed to come out of the room, or having this kind of weird, these checks on the way that they act and behave and move and all of this other stuff. There were even people who were making this point of like a cult or like a sex cult. It's just very, very bizarre stuff. And so here's a history of it. He's been able to skate on it for decades. And at this point, the bill has come due.
Yeah. Where to start? I mean, it's been going on for decades. Like you said, most prominent was when he married Aaliyah.
Yeah. That was shocking.
And he was able to get a fake certificate, you know, a fake ID for. I think it said they paid like $500 for it.
Yeah.
The minister.
They were talking about this publicly at the time, right? Like, it was.
Yeah.
Known.
Well, they weren't. I don't know if they were publicly seen as married, but everybody knew something was going on with him and Aaliyah. That was the open secret. Everybody knew something was going on with Aaliyah, and the birth certificate did get made public.
Yeah.
But by this point, R. Kelly's just. I mean, we're talking about the king of R&B. I want people who don't really understand what statue of, you know, what level of R. Kelly is.
I Can Fly.
This guy has hits on hits. Like, man, his discography is incredible.
When was this sort of period going on? Like, when
with
did
Aaliyah?
Exactly.
This was in the 90s,
right?
Really? Yeah, this was in the 90s.
So over 20 years that this has been happening, basically.
Yes.
I believe he was 25 at the time.
And she was like 15.
Yeah.
And people knew. Like, that's what I mean. Like, it wasn't like a mystery or a secret, even when it was happening. It was like, whoa, she looks kind of young. Are they, you know, what is that about? But there were no consequences. There were no repercussions. If I'm not mistaken, they had the marriage annulled. But that's somewhat of a moot point.
Right.
You married a 15-year-old. What are you doing? And, you know, even the people that were around them that basically allowed that to take place. Yeah, it was problematic. And by the way, it wasn't just hit making for himself. Writing songs.
Oh yeah, making beats.
Making beats. Yeah,
signing artists. I mean, that was his card right there. He used to promise a lot of these young girls that he would be able to get them a career in the music industry, get them to move up. Even Aaliyah, as talented as Aaliyah was, she wanted to stick close to R. Kelly because she knew that she had to stick to him to be able to level up in the music industry. Yeah. And I mean, this guy is just a predator. He's been a predator and they called it a corporation because of the magnitude of power that he had. And I mean, it's just crazy that a lot of these girls were just 15, 16. And the question has to come, like, where were their parents? How is it allowed that they, I mean, I'm not a father, but I would imagine if I have a 15, 16-year-old, I'm going to know
his head off,
at least 90 to 95% of what my child is doing at all times. Like, it's going to be some things that they're able to, you know, hide under the rug. But for the most part, they're not just going to be off gallivanting in the middle of the night with R. Kelly.
Actually,
15.
But some of them were. That's the other wild point. Look, in Surviving R. Kelly, I remember one of the cases, she took R. Kelly, took the girl to the studio, like her cousin or niece or something like that. And she finds out after the fact that R. Kelly was not just having sex with the girl. If I'm not mistaken, that was even the P-tape that took place where he basically peed on like a 15-year-old.
And got away with it. I mean, it's astonishing stuff that was taking place. And yeah, his superstar or his famedom basically protected him. Every bit as much as Bill Cosby was protected by that stuff.
Is this where the racketeering thing comes in? Is basically he's offering people, okay, well, you know, you do this with me, and I'll elevate you in your career, basically, in the music business more broadly. And so that's
pretty much. I believe so. I mean, because he had to. He's using his power to satisfy his predator nature. And these girls are so influential. I mean, this is R. Kelly, you know, and I mean, he's just taking advantage of girls that are about 10 to 15 years under him, and this is his target range. Like, this is consistency. Even after he married Aaliyah, a couple of days later, he was accused of raping a 17-year-old in his dressing room before a show. Like, this is what he goes out there, and the fact that the industry protected him, I think it says a lot about the industry as well. So many people knew about this, and they waited for years until the documentary is made. Now everybody wants to talk, but everybody stood by and watched it happen.
Yeah.
They watched it happen because of their own careers, because they were afraid their own careers would be ruined by him.
Maybe that's where the racketeering thing came in. I mean, because you have all of these other people who are around him that he pays. You know, it's not like they're just doing this for the kindness of their heart. Either he pays, either he gets some music industry, either they're his handlers, bodyguards, etc. And all of them knew, and all of them basically kept quiet. So yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary that they were able to pull this. It says the charge was based around 14 underlying crimes that he was accused of committing as part of a criminal enterprise. Only 2 of them needed to be proven to convict. And let's say R. Kelly declined to testify in his own defense. That's probably wise. But his lawyers tried to cast the accusers as opportunists, liars, and obsessive fans, arguing that sex with the singer had been consensual and that their accounts of abuse and misconduct was fabricated. I don't think so.
No, this sounds like, after reading the stories even more in depth, this sounds like a guy who really, he believed that these were his kids. I mean, apparently there was spankings involved if they looked at a guy, if they had to go sit in a dark room, if they decided to go, do anything before asking permission from him. They had to call him daddy. Like, this is a guy who's looking for teenagers and treated them almost like they're his kids, except the sexual part.
He's raping them.
Yeah.
Except he's raping them. And it sounds like a weird sort of harem situation. Is anybody else, who else is implicated in this in terms of the perpetrators? Is it just R. Kelly?
In this situation, so far, at least, it seems like it's just R. Kelly.
And if he's being possessive of them, that makes perfect sense. But that was one of the questions that was coming to mind. And it was a little bit confusing for me, partly just because if it was so if it was so publicly known, I'll put it like this. If 90% of the people in the industry suspected, if 100% of the people in the industry suspect it for decades, and really, it's only the last couple of years, it seems, that it starts to actually accelerate and get into the legal system, you start to wonder, are there other people in on it? Are there other people benefiting from it? That kind of thing.
It's definitely people benefiting from it. I think that's when you talk about the people who are really in charge of these record labels at the time, I have to believe that they caught wind of what's going on. And R. Kelly was such a big moneymaker, they're not going to let him go to jail. The powers that be, they're not going to let him get taken away. So I do think he was protected, which is even more reason why he would feel as empowered as he did. I mean, he's big enough off his own name, but he knows that the people who have more power than him are willing to protect him. Yeah. So that gives him more ammo to go out here and be even bolder. So I definitely am not doubting that there was that people knew about this and that there were people benefiting, not necessarily off of him dealing with these underage girls, but benefiting off the fact that it's not getting out and R. Kelly's being able to go through untouched.
So Austin was iffy on coming in, but then he's been posting all this stuff in the chat room. So I just come on in, Austin. What were you going to say, Austin?
Yeah, you read it off in the headlines. I had put it in there for a reason. They basically proved in this trial against R. Kelly, that the people that were involved, so the music producers and other people that were basically in charge of keep R. Kelly happy because of how much money he makes, they proved that it constituted a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
So if they want to, they could go after any of those people if they want. They're not just sitting around and watching, because I know that basically in the Me Too movement, it came out that if you were watching and didn't say anything, then you were just as culpable.
Yeah. But they weren't just watching.
They weren't just watching. Helping. They were introducing girls to him.
That's right.
To try to keep him happy. So now they basically set the precedent right now that they could go after way more than just R. Kelly. It's just if they want to, if they have the time and resources to do it, because a lot of this happened a long time ago.
They can basically find bodyguards. They can find handlers. Any of these people that either found girls, lied for R. Kelly during the process, or was able to get something out of it, like a music career or something like that.
They could go way higher. They could hit major record producers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting, especially if they knew what was taking place.
Oh, they had
and
to.
They didn't do anything.
Yeah, or the execs. I mean, producers, people at the highest. Yeah, that starts to get pretty shady.
Wow.
Well, the question is now, do you go after the secretaries of the big producers that say keep R. Kelly healthy, do it happy, do whatever he wants, and it's they set up meetings and stuff. So yes, I mean they're culpable, but who is more culpable? Is it that person, or is it the big name record company that commissioned that person to do it?
That's a good question. I mean, the record company had a fiduciary interest in not having R. Kelly go down. I mean, and this was like, what, 20-something years, 25 years at this point where this was taking place? Yeah, I mean, and I guess the fact that they use racketeering in and of itself, it would be an overkill if you weren't going to do that. Like if you were just, okay, we just only want R. Kelly. Well, the racketeering charge basically makes it a criminal enterprise. There's all sorts of people that would be involved in a criminal enterprise. And so it just seems like an overkill if they weren't, at the very least, considering going after some of the other people that were involved in the process. And for it to be going on this long, man, maybe they should.
They have to.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to do something about the people who are taking it amongst themselves to bring these girls into danger. At least those people, at least the handlers who are primarily bringing them through. If we're talking about a secretary who's sending out a mass email saying, you know, whatever R. Kelly wants, keep him happy, that's a little bit of a line because they're not directly saying bring him 15-year-old girls.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If somebody had to actually take that upon themselves. And it's crazy because in a lot of cases like this, it's usually women that are bringing these girls to these predators like that. It's usually women attracting them and bringing them around. And I mean, that's just beyond me to. I mean, I'm not saying that it was a woman that exactly did this, but there have been stories that there have been women that have brought some of these girls around with them as like their little cousins or whatnot and bringing them to the studio to meet R. Kelly, and they know what's going on, and
well,
it's just crazy.
It's probably worth going back to the Epstein case for just a second because we brought up Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, who's a madame currently in prison. That was one person, but he would also use young women themselves, either women, you know, either girls or young women that he was raping, or he would find some who he wouldn't, and he would just be like, hey, you go get people for me, and I'll give you money, I'll give you favors, you'll get to come hang out. Remember, Epstein's a rich guy, you know, living in Florida. He has a place that he invites people over to, which is another angle on this. Say the girls in this case, 15, 16, 17, 14, however years old, if they were bringing other girls into it, I don't know how that works out legally. Do you guys have any idea?
17, 18? 15,
well, say they're 15, 16, 17.
I say I have a friend that's 15 that may want to give a massage or something like that.
Exactly. Because
is the 15 culpable for bringing somebody else into it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, I get the feeling.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get the feeling that it's going to be more so along the lines of people who either protected or assisted from the standpoint of record companies and stuff like that. I don't know.
Because these girls are also victims themselves, of
Exactly.
course. Say they're being raped and say he's getting them to get more girls to rape. Well, they're being victimized, but they're also bringing more victims into the system.
Right.
And it's just a complicated moral problem.
Right. So legal age of reason is 14, I believe, where the law considers basically like an act of a child. Like you can't fault a 7-year-old for jaywalking, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's like 13 or 14. So in that case, they are in knowledge of what they're doing, but I don't think that a court would find them guilty because you would just argue that they were brainwashed into thinking nothing was wrong here.
Yeah. Emotionally coerced or whatever.
Right.
I don't know the legally how they would exculpate them, but no, that makes perfect sense. It's just, I'm just trying to figure out different sides of this thing. So is this almost culturally, does this mean anything for the music industry or for the rap industry?
Well, for him, like I noted, I mean, for me at least, I mean, and then we're talking about outside of all of this, we're talking strictly music. I've always felt like R. Kelly is the king of R&B. I've always felt like that. And I mean, this guy has made hits after hits. He's done collab albums.
What should happen to his music? Are they going to give her the 12
Don't ask
play?
me selfishly
Absolutely
because I don't know. I'm good. Me personally, I'm good at separating the person from the work.
Right.
You know,
So when he's singing, I don't see nothing wrong, or it seems like you're ready.
Thankfully, that's not
go
one of
all
my
the way.
favorite songs.
That's not a song you listen to anyway.
Thankfully, that's not one of my favorite songs. But it's a lot like, I mean, a lot of 90% of his songs are like sexual songs.
Yeah.
So they're all on the same road. It's big. People bring up like this King of R&B discussion. He's not even a part of it anymore.
Yeah.
And they're having to take it to people who are still great, Usher and Chris Brown and all these other guys. But in reality, it would be R. Kelly. So now with all of this, I mean, it's pretty much disqualified him and is made people at least want to boycott his music, which has for decades been, I mean, if you're looking for slow jams, this is where you would go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. The American people are a crazy, weird bunch. I was talking about this with Bob on Political Misfits. I don't know if you remember Morgan Wallen, country singer. Got some great music, but there was a video that came out of him, and he like screamed the N-word while he was like drunk at night, coming back at like 2, 3 in the morning. He was with a bunch of buddies, and he was screaming the N-word like multiple times to his neighbors and stuff.
Yeah. Recently.
Yeah. Well, I think it was
a couple
like
years ago.
Yeah. Recently enough. Yeah. He actually saw over 500,000 increase in sales after that happened, and he was like, "Whoa!" And yeah, he ended up donating all that money to like black charities and a whole bunch of stuff, which I thought was a great way to handle that situation. Because he was like, "I'm sorry about this, and there's no reason I should be making money off it." So he donated all the extra, but he made more money with his music for a controversy. It's like any PR is good PR.
Maybe that's not, it could be white nationalists or something, or like white supremacists, or it could just be people getting interested in it. I don't know.
I don't think it was. I mean, yes, I don't know if we could really find demographics for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of it can be from that. I don't think the majority of it was, though. I think it's more like his name is in the news.
Exactly.
They look him up and they're like, oh, he's got some music, and listen to him.
I agree with that. I mean, it's been, I've watched Boondocks.
Yeah. Boondocks is
and there was a Chris Brown episode in there where he was like, look, man, I just want to stay in the news. Anytime they're talking about me is good publicity.
Yeah.
And it's to that point, whether it's good or bad, and a lot of times it's the bad that gets the most exposure, that gets the most interaction. And just your name, people are like, let me just go check this song out again. He did make this song that I really love. Like, it's crazy. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I actively go look for R. Kelly songs now, but I mean, they may pop up on my shuffle, out of nowhere.
And still going to be at a bar. It's still going to be Ignition.
I mean, Ignition.
The remix of Ignition.
Is one of my favorites. It is.
Still going to be jamming out to it.
Stuff. I do not know this stuff.
Wow. You don't know that?
I don't know that. No, I haven't. I think, you know what? The thing is this has been like the idea that R. Kelly's been doing this stuff has been around for like years and years. I remember South Park did an episode the longest time ago. They were making fun of him. It wasn't for this, but I think it was implied in a part of it.
It was probably something to do with this. Boondocks did the R. Kelly episode.
Yeah.
Too.
And so, growing up, it was only more recently that I started to get like more into R&B and that side of music, last 5 or 6 years. And I was just like, I grew up, do I want to listen to this guy? Like having that thought process before the trial happens or anything, which is maybe a little bit prejudgy of me or something like that. But the song that you brought up, Jamarl.
Seems like it ready.
What is that? And what does that have to do with this?
Seems like it's one of his songs on 12 Play. Temperatures rising, your body's yearning, et cetera, et cetera. But this basically the hook of the song is, it seems like you're ready to go all the way, which sounds pretty dicey in retrospect, right? I mean, in retrospect, considering everything that you know now, it seems like that 14-year-old is ready to go all the way. I mean, yeah.
But does he, or it's just somebody getting turned on, to be blunt about it.
Right, but so a lot of music is like sexual innuendos, right?
Yeah.
But now that you go back and you're like, well, he's writing this.
Yeah,
like, it's easy. It's easy when you hear the song to be like, oh, I can see myself in a situation with this age of consent girl because that's how I just normally think.
Yeah.
With like my girlfriend or my significant other or something like that. He's thinking it, writing it in the mindset of, man, that 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And that's where you get all,
that's exactly. It's not even so much that it's in the lyrics. It's where he's coming from when he's writing the lyrics. And you can't get that out of your head when you're listening to the song.
Not anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Context at this point. I mean, Aaliyah was, 15 when you married her?
And that's my girl.
Yeah.
I mean, I that was probably my first celebrity crush, was Aaliyah. So I probably should have been a little bit more upset at R. Kelly than I was.
But that's the wild part. Why weren't people more upset? I mean, because when the Aaliyah thing came out, this was only like a few years after they had gotten married.
Right.
And so it didn't seem like there were any consequences either politically, legally, or for that matter, even culturally. Like where people were like, whoa, that's too far. They seem to be perfectly okay with it. I mean, I don't know if this is a Me Too thing or what. Michael Jackson, same thing. Where, it's like, all right, you had people falling out when Michael Jackson was in court against pedophilia charges. And it's like, he's on trial for pedophilia. It's just, I don't know. I mean, is celebrity that potent of a thing where it's like, all right, Mike gets one kid and R. Kelly gets 1 or 2 underage girls? I mean, because that's what it seems like it is.
You know what else is interesting to that? It's only the music industry. Because think about actors like Gina Carano, I believe her name is, who was in the new Star Wars. she came out as someone made fun. Someone said like, "Why don't you have your pronouns in your bio for Twitter?"
Yeah.
And she said, "My bad, beep bop boop." And they canceled her, got her kicked off of Star Wars.
Really?
Really?
She's an actress.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because she said beep bop
But
boop.
there wasn't there
beep,
more
bop,
to it.
boop.
Wasn't there more to it than that? Wasn't she also like? Didn't she have some other political opinions or something like that?
Yeah. She
always is.
She said beep bop boop in one post, and the next one was like, "If you think that you can tell me, if you can impose your ideology on me, whatever." But my point to this is that she was a pretty prominent actress.
Yeah.
Canceled,
Didn't
taken off of Disney, like all Disney productions. If you're a music artist, or if you're beloved in some way, like Bill Cosby, like Michael Jackson, somehow the public can oversee it.
But it doesn't translate to sports, and it doesn't translate to acting per se.
Actually, I'd say it translates to sports more than actors and actresses.
See, I don't know any sports stars that are messing with 14-year-olds.
Do you know any NFL running backs that have done some stuff and were allowed to play for a while?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Well, NFL running backs that did that? No, I don't know about that, but Lawrence Taylor has had issues with teenage girls. And Karl Malone from the Utah Jazz actually impregnated a teenage girl while he was playing.
Wow.
But I also think a big reason as to why things have been happening more lately as opposed to the 90s is social media.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it. Everybody gets to give their take right there, and everybody gets influenced. Regardless of what people say, social media influences users. And I think that back in the 90s, people were able to react how they really feel, as opposed to social media where everybody is an activist. Everybody says the right things at all times, and everybody feels the same way. And social media causes it to seem like sometimes that there's a million people that all feel this way, and it forces people to take action sometimes, whereas opposed in the 90s, we really don't know how everybody reacted. We know they still went and supported the music, obviously, but we don't know how they truly felt at the time.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, not to mention, there's no way to escape either the charges, either people talking about it. It draws. I mean, because if you see something on the news, okay, that's on the news. That's separate from you in a weird way, as opposed to having millions of people talking about it and pushing it and, making a story out of it. So what do you think happens with this? I mean, he goes to jail. Yes. Is this a warning to other celebs that may try to get away with something like this? Or is it, no, it's a once off. R. Kelly was just particularly bad.
It's hard for me to call it a warning in a sense of, look how long it took for these girls to get justice. Is it going to be like, okay, get it out while you can now, because in another 15 years, we're going to make a documentary about everything, and then it'll be exposed and you'll have to pay for your crimes then. But right now, while you're still popular, while your music is still relevant, you're good. Enjoy it now. So if that's the warning, sure. But I can't sit here and say that this is, if there's a celebrity doing this right now, that this R. Kelly case is making them be like, oh, I got to stop right now. I have to stop right now. Like, I don't think so.
I think the leading question behind that is, was the Me Too movement a permanent thing?
Right.
Or is it just kind of a resurgence? Or is it just a surgence and then it dies back down? Because it was also, like, it was the documentary, but it was also like the Me Too movement that exposed a bunch of these cases, including his. So is work that they've done, have they changed a precedent? So now that it's like, if anyone hears about this, they're more empowered to go out and speak about it. They're less inclined to perpetuate the cycle by bringing other girls in and stuff like that. Or we need another big push. We need another walking in the streets. You will not silence me. Whole bunch of stuff.
Well, two things on that. For one thing, Me Too, if you remember, was a lot of celebrities. Pretty much everybody who was making these accusations was a celebrity making an accusation against another celebrity. These were people who had power. I'm not saying the same levels of power, but it was all happening within that sphere. Compare that to this case. These are a lot of young women who either just getting into the industry, not in the industry. They don't have power. They're entering into a fundamentally asymmetrical relationship with this person. For another thing, these are black women. And during Me Too, it was pretty much entirely white women.
Yeah.
Just a couple of differences. And I'm not addressing your question, which is what's the relevance, what's the ongoing importance of the Me Too movement? A valid question. But I'm noticing this is, a way in which that doesn't quite line up with it, for better and for worse, whatever.
Yeah. The black women thing is different too. I mean, that is different. And that was one of the things that was brought up specifically, actually, because oftentimes in situations like this, it feels like African-American women are, I don't know, less regarded and stuff like this. I mean, even the Patino cases where people was like, oh, another white woman that's missing, and what about all these other people of color that are missing and everything else? And the Me Too movement, yeah, it seems like the majority of them were white. And so the fact that you have a black celebrity and pretty much all of his victims, if I'm not mistaken, were of African-American descent or person of color, and there's some level of acknowledgement at this point, yeah, it's somewhat different.
I have a horrible question. It's going to sound bad.
Always the best kind.
Do you think, right, so this abuse happened in the 80s, 90s, 80s, 90s, pre-me. So, okay, so do you think that the amount of white women in Me Too movement could be because if it was perpetrated by higher ups in Hollywood and stuff like that, at least their perception of what is beauty involves whiteness?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think
like were they.
So I'm gonna put it in the
racial value.
You're asking, were all these execs most attracted to the white women, basically, and that's why all these white women were getting.
Was it more perpetrated, or I guess, were there more white victims than black victims because they considered like beauty the standard of what they wanted to be white?
Well, whites also make up 70% of the country, so almost by definition, you're going to get more whites than blacks. I mean, but I don't know if that's the beauty standard thing.
Yeah, and I hate to go prehistoric here, but if we're talking about beauty, I mean, there were slave owners like raping slaves.
Right.
So I mean, it shows you what their visual of beauty could be. They had white women in the house who were clean, as opposed to the the slaves that they were out in dirt all day, and they would still go to them. So it's always been a thing of. I don't know if necessarily the higher-ups just view white women as beauty, but I do think it's more of a percentile thing like Jamarl was saying.
And here's the other side of it. It doesn't necessarily, it's also like, okay, so say 70%. If we're looking back at the 90s, in terms of the high-profile celebrities, what's the racial composition on either end?
Yeah, more white.
It's not going to be, as far as I can tell, as far as I remember, maybe I'm wrong, but it wouldn't be 30% black people. Not that that's the percentage of the population; it would be less than that. Blah blah blah. But it's disproportionate.
To even be around that crowd, generally it probably was more white women. To be real, to be in those circles at that time, it probably was.
Well, coming back to the R. Kelly thing for just a second, it's like maybe this would be a good moment. I don't know. This feels a little bit, you don't want to manipulate a story, but like. All the focus right now is on R. Kelly, the dude, the celebrity, which is just building up his image. But you also want to consider the people that he abused. Like, how can we tell their stories? How can we get their side of the conversation out, that kind of thing? Because it's up to the culture, I think, to do that. And the media and all this stuff, too. But not to just focus on the celebrity who's guilty of it, but the victims. So that to the extent that they want their stories to be told, they're able to. And this kind of thing doesn't happen again. We continue to, put this person on a pedestal and make whatever their successes, their crimes about them. I don't know, without focusing. Does that make any sense without focusing on the people that they victimized?
No, I agree. And I think it's more so about what can we do to keep this from happening in the future. And that's why I've been taking it to the parents. You have to let a 15-year-old be a 15-year-old. I mean, unless this 15-year-old is in the industry and making music, because there are some child stars, but no 15-year-old should just be going to the studio with R. Kelly just to be there, to be a part of the entourage. Like, you should be in a book.
All right, let's close this out. Cordell Woodland, Austin Pelly, producers for this show. Thank you for joining us to talk about this.
No problem.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into our break, coming back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. You're listening to Fault Lines. We will be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 194,723 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 2,380 deaths reported. I mentioned yesterday that over the weekend, for whatever reason, the number always drops. And that's probably a reporting issue, less so a reality issue. But here we are again, 2,380 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 117,966 cases per day, a decrease of 33% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 55% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,100,295 human beings in the United States and has killed an unfortunate 690,558 men, women, and children. And if the rate keeps up within 2 weeks, we're going to hit the 700,000 mark. Great. Pfizer-BioNTech has started large-scale testing of a new oral drug for COVID-19 prevention. The pill is designed to block the receptors for the virus that it needs to replicate or to duplicate, allowing the body to fight the original source. The pill is designed as a preventative measure for those believing that they have been exposed but are not yet ill. As Bob Schlehuber describes it, it's like a COVID Plan B medication. If I'm not mistaken, the studies for this, they're using people who have someone with COVID in the household that presents and is active, and the pill is going to people who basically are in the household. It's the way that they're going about testing to see if the pill actually works. Senate Republicans sank the short-term government funding debt limit bill. Congress is 72 hours away from a potential shutdown in order to pass this bill before it happens. Democrats are now expected to strip the bill of raising the debt limit in order to get it passed. We have a clip of Mitch McConnell talking about this, and I'm going to give you guys a moment to pull that clip up. But let me know when you get it. And basically the question becomes, is Mitch McConnell serious about being willing to hit that debt limit? And does the Democratic Party in and of themselves have enough power basically to do it? Meaning, do they require Democrat-Republican assistance? Let's play the clip.
For more than 2 months now, Senate Republicans have been completely clear about how this process will play out. So let me make it abundantly clear one more time. We will support a clean continuing resolution that will prevent a government shutdown, get disaster relief to Louisiana, help properly vetted Afghan refugees who put themselves on the line for America, and support the Iron Dome assistance for our ally, Israel. We will not provide Republican votes for raising the debt limit.
Interesting. So the catch becomes, is he going to stick to it? And what does Mitch McConnell want out of this? And is it just boils down to stopping whatever particular agenda Biden is coming up with? Either way, he sounds serious. Let's keep going. President Biden received his third dose of COVID-19 vaccine yesterday, taking the booster shot manufactured by Pfizer-BioNTech. This comes after the FDA panel recommended shots for people over the age 65 and older and those at high risk for the transmissible or intransmissible jobs. Pursuant to the last conversation, R. Kelly, ultra star R. Kelly, has been convicted of sex trafficking after nearly 3 decades of the alleged crime. He married then 15-year-old Aaliyah Dana Houghton in 1994. Prosecutors proved that the actions of managers and aides who helped R. Kelly meet more girls amounted to a crime of criminal enterprise. Several women testified in the trial, saying that they were subjected to perverse and sadistic whims, and they were underage at the same time. R. Kelly has been convicted of basically racketeering, and I think it was 8 counts of, there it is, yeah, 8 counts of anti-trafficking or sex trafficking laws. And so R. Kelly could potentially be in prison for life. John Hinckley Jr., or Hinckley Jr., is to be released after wounding President Ronald Reagan and 3 others in a failed assassination attempt in 1981. In 1982, Hinckley was found not guilty of the act due to mental insanity, and after 34 years served in a mental institution, has been granted unconditional release. Hinckley must have regular visits with doctors and psychologists. Interesting. In local news, Mayor Muriel Bowser has announced an extension of the ticket amnesty program. Until the end of the year, the district will remove penalties on parking and minor moving violations and allow to pay only the original amount. Any tickets received since June 1st or until the end of the year are affected. Mayor Bowser stated that this has been a vital program in helping out residents and has more than 32,000 participants. The head of one of Afghanistan's largest banks said the sector was near collapse, speaking from Dubai, while in Afghanistan itself, the banks are sites of repeated runs by anxious members of the public looking to withdraw funds. With more withdrawals than contributions and a dwindling ability to pay the withdrawals, the chief executive of the Islamic Bank of Afghanistan warned of an existential crisis. Climate activists in the city of Milan beat war drums against older generations for failing to avert climate change. Speakers there included Greta Thunberg, Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, alongside of hundreds of other predominantly young attendees. And in Earth and Science news, a fireball passed over the coast last night, traveling at 32,000 miles per hour. Fireballs are another name for meteors that are so bright they illuminate more than Venus, the brightest planet in our solar system. After traveling 26 miles in Earth's atmosphere, it disintegrated after its course. And those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, so the R. Kelly thing, I was trying to find the explicit, here it is. You found guilty of racketeering and 8 counts of violating an anti-sex trafficking law, according to the New York Times. And his sentencing hearing apparently is coming up within a few months. May 4th, 2022. So he has about a year. It's unclear whether or not he's going to be able to settle that time out of jail or whether or not he's going to have to serve that time in jail. But either way, R. Kelly is going to have a hard road ahead of him, to put it mildly. Yeah. And good conversation. You guys should definitely go check it out. On the last segment, we brought in the producers and we had a great talk about it. So I want to go into where is it? This one, the BioNTech. So they're starting large-scale testing of a new oral drug, and the drug is supposed to undermine some of the, constituent needs of the drug, of the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus to reproduce itself. One of the people for BioNTech, one of the CEOs or one of the main spokespeople, basically was making the point that within a year, COVID will be over with. I am greatly suspicious of that. I mean, at this point, we've had so many different variations that it seems like there's a variant, and then that variant basically gets out of control and et cetera. And right now we're in the wake of the Delta variant. But I haven't seen anything that gets across this notion that this is going to be over with within a year. And to be honest, it feels like it's something that's just going to go in perpetuity, continuously changing, always having to accommodate it. I could be wrong. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it will persist. We won't be able to cut it out. I've said this many times before. 100%, yeah. And that's because of our failure to prepare for it, to respond to it at the time. All that stuff. Yes, agreed.
And, Biden, and that's the other thing that's taking place today, the mandate. So in New York, we're going to talk to Ted about it. But basically the mandate was for healthcare workers to get vaccinated in New York. And if I am not mistaken, they're like 10 to 15% of workers in the healthcare field that aren't vaccinated. And the deadline for that is basically today. And so that comes a call.
That was midnight last night in some cases.
Yeah. So that brings up an interesting question. If the hospitals, let's say the overwhelming majority of the people in the hospitals are vaccinated, and you have, let's say, 15% that aren't vaccinated, well, what do you do with that scenario?
Well, you fire the people who are unvaccinated, and you bring in the National Guard to help.
And that's what they're planning on doing.
Planning on doing.
Yeah. I mean, is there enough National Guard to deal with it? I guess that's one of the questions. 5,000 of the 43,000 employees, about 12% were not vaccinated as of Monday. And so, yeah, they're talking about bringing in the National Guard to take. I mean, but can you do that for across the country, though? I mean, it seems like there's going to be a limit to the number of National Guard that you can bring in to bear for any particular issue. And if this is not just New York, let's say this is, well, if it's a mandate of 100 employees or more, what happens if many of those employees, especially in hospitals, because I think in the hospitals is more acute, just said, yeah, we don't want to do this, and they bail? Is there really enough National Guard to compensate for the number of people who are basically going to lose their jobs, or at the very least are not going to be able to work? And if not, what does it mean going forward to deal with an issue like this? I hope that makes sense. It's like, yes, you have X number of people that you want to get vaccinated. You don't want those people to be at risk, nor do you want those people risking the lives of people who are already susceptible to illness because they're in the hospital at this point. Fine. But if you get a large segment of the workers who are needed to support the hospital and keep that hospital active, basically not being there, then what? I don't have an answer for that.
I don't think anybody does. That's a couple contingencies down the line, though. A couple of takes on this. One, the optics are terrible. We're failing so bad that doctors and nurses are fired, either being fired or they're quitting. And who do we send in to replace them? The military. So for all the people who are concerned about government overreach and the long arm of the law and the increasing tyranny, whatever the words they would use, that kind of thing. Now we have military. Now we have the National Guard. That's not going to calm anybody down. That's not going to make them feel better. What this is, in some sense, is calling everybody at a hospital who doesn't want to get a vaccine, basically calling their bluff, for better and for worse, being like, okay, you guys, well, we'll fire you and we'll replace you. And that's what you mean to us. Now, that doesn't exactly, I don't know, there are a bunch of ways in which I don't like that. But in terms of hardball politics, whatever, I guess I can see it. But it's all the results of a long-term failure. And, well, let's go back to this one. How do you think they should have handled this one? Stepping back for a second. Should they let them stay on while getting negative COVID tests, that kind of thing? Or should they require everybody across the board to be vaccinated? Just taking those two options.
Because there's this kind of pragmatic approach associated with it where you're stuck with reality, whatever it is. And if you have more people that are leaving the hospital system where the hospitals are decapitated in regards to their ability to function. I mean, in one case, they were cutting down on the ability to do maternity wards. I mean, just even, just childcare. And so if you have a situation where the hospitals can't function because of 15% of the population deciding that they're going to lose their jobs, okay, well, then what? I mean, you could be hard on it, but there's a kind of a pragmatic part associated with it where it's like, well, if we get rid of these people, we can't function. Meaning we can't even do the basic due diligence of healthcare if we get rid of the people who are basically not getting the vaccine. By the same token, there's this other secondary part of, well, yeah, but do you want those people who are going to be at the hospital getting care at risk because that particular person didn't get vaccinated, or even the worker themselves being at some level of risk because, again, they didn't necessarily get vaccinated? I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, my first instinct is, no, you hold the line on the vaccinations. But again, that runs into a practical reality of what if so many people leave that you just can't function as a hospital during a pandemic? That seems like it's a worse outcome. So I'm not sure. I mean, at the very least, testing would need to be part of the mix, where you could at the very least keep track of the people who are there who are not getting the vaccinations in order to keep persistent testing.
And here's another way. Shouldn't we be doing testing for everybody in general, whether they're vaccinated or not?
Yes.
That should just be a prerequisite, right?
Yes,
and at
this point.
And at that point, if you have, say you have fast testing, which you're a hospital, you should have access to. The government should have given you access to like on-the-spot, 2-hour testing, that kind of thing. You test people literally every day. People who are frontline workers in hospitals, testing them literally every day. Do you have COVID or do you not? Wouldn't it be irrelevant at that point whether or not they're vaccinated in some sense? Just for them, because you'd know right away. Yeah. You're testing people constantly, whether they're vaccinated or not. if they catch COVID, there's a chance they can spread it.
Yeah.
You should keep them from spreading it. So then, when they test positive, you send them into a quarantine, you keep testing them.
Yeah.
When they've recovered fully and you give it some extra time, probably, then you bring them back in. But at that point, whether they're vaccinated or not, that's their choice,
Yeah.
right?
You at least have coverage in regards to seeing what's going on within your hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they would get vaccinated tested every day just because it's a pain to get tested, unless there's just an easier way of testing.
Maybe, but still 20 seconds. It takes 20 seconds of the person's time. I'm not saying the whole testing process takes 20 seconds, but you walk up, you pull your mask down, they have a swab, they stick it up your nose, they pull it out your nose. That's no more than 20 seconds, right? That's not that big of a hurdle. My point is that would have alleviated this problem, but I'm guessing that's not being pursued either because nobody's proposed it, and or because the lack of tests, I
thought the original proposition was either tested or the vaccine.
Yes.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I thought that was the original premise behind it. And I remember the way we were talking about this was, do they even have enough tests?
That's for OSHA.
Okay.
That's the OSHA business change.
The 100 employees.
100 plus employees, businesses, any above the small business, basically. Although some businesses who have 150 employees or whatever are still considered small, so set that aside for a second. Basically, that applies to them.
Yeah.
This is another set of rules, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess we're going to see how many people lose their jobs and how many people are serious about losing their jobs to not get vaccinated.
And we're going to keep talking about it. We have Ted on the line, Ted Rawl in New York City, the subject of this conflict, the site of it. We're going to be coming back with Ted on the other side of a short break here. Political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Ted in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And since we started off or ended the last segment talking about the vaccine mandate that's taking place in New York today, we might as well start here. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul said she plans to sign an executive order to give herself powers to address the healthcare worker shortages in the state. That healthcare shortage on some level caused by a mandate that goes in effect either last night or today. She says, quote, "Today is a significant deadline. It reflects my priority to stop this virus dead in its tracks. It is a basic right for people to know they will be safe when entering a healthcare facility," the governor added. And this has to do with the Department of Health issuing an order that all healthcare workers in the state are required to be vaccinated against COVID-19 by September 27th. Most of the people in New York are vaccinated for the healthcare workers, but there's about 12% that are not. And in this case, the plan is to use the National Guard to supplement their work. To have a conversation about this, and we're going to also go into the Democratic back and forth over the budget, we're joined with Ted Rawl. Ted Rawl is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jamal. Good to be here.
So what is taking place in New York now? What has been, I guess, the zeitgeist around this particular mandate that has gone through, that basically, if you're a healthcare worker, you got to get vaccinated? And like I said, the overwhelming majority of the healthcare workers did get vaccinated, but there's about 12% that hasn't. and she's bringing in the National Guard to compensate for it. What is it? What's going on? What's the talk in New York proper about all of this?
Well, I'm in New York City, and New York City is overwhelmingly progressive, democratic, and as pretty much as far left as the United States gets. But of course, she's the governor of New York State, which includes vast swaths of Trump territory. It's traditionally Republican. So there's definitely I can't really speak for what's going on in places like Buffalo or Schenectady, where she's from. But I will say that the feeling in New York City has been militantly pro-vaccination, and I hear very extreme pro-vaccination stances like people who are not vaccinated and get COVID should not receive medical treatment while other people are waiting. They shouldn't be allowed to participate in public life. It's very virulent.
Yeah.
I think what's going to probably change those attitudes might be the news that there's a shortage of healthcare workers that's going to be exacerbated as a result of this mandate. And I think there's going to be a lot of people like, well, they should just get vaccinated. But then, sure, but we're going to be short of hundreds, if not thousands, of healthcare workers at a time when the facilities are already strained. So it's, I think it's time for a reality check, which is that we can't mandate our way to compliance. And then there's also sort of, to me, just sort of a willful ignorance of the fact that, and by the way, I'm very pro-vaccine for myself, but it's weird that nobody's talking about the fact that people who are vaccinated, as I am, can transmit the coronavirus. So you walk into a healthcare facility, it can be 100% fully vaccinated compliant, but that doesn't mean you can't get COVID from someone in that facility.
Yes, that is true. Even though the propensity to spread it is somewhat less, they can still spread it. But I never took it as they were saying that you couldn't spread it. I always took it as they were just saying they were trying to cut down the percentage or the chances or the likelihood of the person being infected or, for that matter, spreading it. But that's been but you're making the point that says, you're saying that the logic of it was basically, or people weren't necessarily talking about the fact that it could be spread by people who are vaccinated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because that's kind of the argument that the governor is making, is that people need to feel safe when they go to a healthcare facility, and in order to increase that safety, we need to increase vaccination rates. I think the real reason we need to increase vaccination rates is to try to achieve herd immunity, and also to try to protect people who are not vaccinated from getting very sick or dying. That's the high priority for increasing vaccination rates.
I think that Jamarl is technically right that the idea was never that the vaccines would give you perfect protection. But I remember, and I keep bringing this up, when Biden was giving the speech in late June, by 4th of July, if everybody keeps getting vaccinated, we'll be out there, we'll be able to have our barbecues, that kind of thing. Basically, society would be opening up again. Well, what's his justification for saying that? Unless he wants to allow another wave to take place as people get out and suddenly are congregating again and everybody's getting each other sick, what he's telling people is, you're going to be more safe. Once you get vaccinated, you can get out, you can hang out with other people, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. And as it turns out, that prognosis or whatever was wrong. We have had another serious wave. It was over 2,000 deaths this morning, somewhere around 2,500, let's round it, basically, 2,500 deaths today, 2,380. Still doing pretty poorly, is my point. Ted, my idea for New York City, or for New York more broadly, and for any state that's having to do this stuff, and the crucial assumption here is that we have enough tests, but the idea is, whether you're vaccinated or you're not vaccinated, do your job, but we're going to test you literally every day, not multiple times a day necessarily, but literally every day, because that's what you want to track, is not whether somebody is vaccinated or not, which is important for them and, for some of the people around them, but it's whether or not they're actively sick, in which case they should be removed from the line of duty, put into whatever, they should go into a quarantine, and then when they're not sick and they've recovered fully and they're feeling okay, they come back in. Because if the vaccinated are still able to spread it, you want to know if they're sick. If you get a vaccine and you're asymptomatic, but you're spreading the virus to your patients, the establishment, the hospital, should really care about that. That's like their worst nightmare in some sense. And that would, the same argument, of course, would apply to the unvaccinated. Do you hear that conversation taking place at all, Ted?
I have not heard that conversation taking place, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even if you have everyone's vaccinated, I think you'd still want to test healthcare workers very frequently. Here in New York City, however, there is a massive shortage of testing facilities. I needed a test to travel to Europe recently, and the testing facility, the nearest testing facility to me was about half a mile away, and there was a good solid hour and a half wait. That seems to be pretty standard. Wasn't
standard in the United States. That's not standard abroad.
In New York City.
Yeah.
City, that seems to be pretty. And so, I mean, you can't ask people reasonably to do that every day or even every other day. There's not enough testing facilities. And there's also more testing facilities like walk-in clinics that are now charging for testing. So I have a friend who works at a museum. She's subject to a vaccine mandate, and she's been told she'll be let go unless she agrees to regular testing. But where she lives, there is literally, it's almost impossible for her to get tested on a frequent basis or easily. It's far. The nearest place is half an hour. There's a long wait. I mean, it's a lot to ask. She'll probably just choose to allow herself to be laid off instead.
That is so unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, when we were on vacation, we were traveling, they had testing facilities pretty much everywhere. I mean, you could throw a rock and hit a testing facility.
Where were you? Which countries?
Well, in Georgia and Turkey, especially Istanbul. Istanbul had multiple testing facilities, even in the airport. And the results will come back within less than a day, a few hours. And even in Georgia, it was the same way. I mean, they were all over the place. I don't necessarily see how we got this so wrong. I mean, because you're right. We can't necessarily mandate our way out of it. You also need this kind of secondary process of knowing whether you're infected or not. I mean, look, Biden and the 100 employee thing, part of that was, or get tested 2 or 3 times a week. Well, how can people get tested 2 or 3 times a week if there's not testing? Meaning if they're not the testing facilities there to even accommodate it, Ted.
And, I was in France. The French testing regimen was a mess as well. I couldn't find in Paris adequate testing facilities that didn't have waits that were many hours long. And I ended up going to the airport on my way out. I arrived at the airport 5 hours before my flight. I missed my flight while I was waiting for my test. So the French aren't doing a good job either. I don't understand why this is the case. But, the United States and at least Paris are not doing a good job.
But it's interesting also, Governor Hochul, it's interesting to see her making entreaties, it seems to the religious, saying that vaccines are quote unquote from God and that she's sending out her own apostles, quote unquote, to try to get people to get vaccinated. I don't think of New York State as, it seems like one of the more secular states. Ted, am I wrong in that?
It's a very secular state, and I think that's even true in Trump country. This isn't the Bible Belt by any means.
Ted, I want to pivot real quick, and I want to go into the budget fight that's taking place in Congress. There are 2 bills that are supposed to go up, and this week is going to be, I guess, the determinant factor of whether Joe Biden gets his economic agenda or whether he doesn't get his economic agenda. There's $1.2 trillion. That's a bipartisan bill, supposedly, with Democrats and Republicans coming together to vote on that one. And there's a $3.5 trillion, at least the thought of it, at least right now, $3.5 trillion bill. Now, that one is supposed to be done through budget reconciliation. But Democrats have hit their heads on, despite what is basically unity, a Senate that is not on board. And that Senate, at least 2 members, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. Sinema went so far as to basically say she's not going to increase taxes on corporate or rich Americans. Now, the catch becomes Joe Biden and his agenda wanted to pay for the plan. So even though it's $3.5 trillion, they wanted to basically be able to say, look, we're covering whatever we're paying for in this case. But the moment that you say, okay, we're not going to raise taxes, and you need every last Democrat on the table in order to kind of make it work and to pass it, well, you run into a problem. You've basically hobbled his ability to pay for the plan and to get the plan over the finish line. And if they're not going to support the plan, lefties have already said it's all or nothing, meaning you either need to back both of these, and both of these things need to be done simultaneously, or nothing gets passed. What is going on here? I mean, I was looking at the amount of money that she was getting in donations, $923,000 in donations to Semina, who are working on basically from industries that are trying to kill the bill or water the bill down. I mean, is it as straightforward as that? Or is there something else that's going on here behind the scenes? I mean, at the end of the day, this is Democrats negotiating with Democrats.
It is. I'm sure that at some point the question has gone to Joe Manchin. Could West Virginia use any more highways? After all, Robert Byrd pretty much paved the entire state in some strange places. I don't, and the answer is I don't think it can. I don't think that's Manchin's game. I think that's the thing that's tough. Is this is not just horse trading. It's not. It really does seem to be a combination of just simply representing a red state and just hoping to get reelected and kowtowing to those donors. It just doesn't seem to be anything else. So I think it puts the Biden administration, it puts the White House in a very difficult position. And I honestly don't see how they're going to get out of it or how they're going to get this done.
I mean, is there any leverage at all for this? I mean, there's a quote where Joe Biden basically told Manchin, "You're effing up my agenda, man," or something to that effect. Because he is. I mean, this is, when you think about what needs to get done, and even from the standpoint of whether or not Democrats are going to retain the House or the Senate, and potentially even the presidency, on some level, it seems to rise and fall on whatever economic agenda Biden is trying to get passed. And if he doesn't have the capacity to do it, because he can't push Manchin or he can't push Sinema, but it seems like it kills the agenda. Is there any leverage? Is there any stick that they have to use to either compel or to incentivize Manchin and Sinema to basically fall in line with the rest of what seems to be a majority of the party?
The question is, who needs, do the Democrats need Sinema and Manchin more than Manchin and Sinema need the Democrats? And I think the answer is yes. So therefore, I don't think there's much leverage. There's not going to be any more major Biden achievements without these two senators. The Republicans are holding a firm line, and I think they get to call the shots, much of the same way that, say, in an earlier day, Joe Lieberman got to call the shots. This is just sort of the nature of the party until if and when you get a bigger Democratic majority, a much bigger Democratic majority in the Senate.
And do we see that happening in the midterms here? Based on the, what do you think, Ted?
Historically, I say no. It would be very unlikely that the Democrats could avoid even significant, any losses in the midterms. That's just sort of the way things work. And I think that goes double for the fact that the midterms aren't this year. It's next year. That's a long time. And between now and then, there probably isn't going to be much to show for the Biden agenda. And Americans have short memories. They're going to forget their stimulus checks. And they're going to say, and they're going to be like, well, what has the White House done for us lately? That'll be the Republican talking point. So, yeah, I don't think that's good.
Now, I want to go down this vein. I don't want to get, this is admittedly going on a tangent from the original conversation, but it's also a topic of great importance. So say we pass the midterms, you're right, Democrats take some losses. Then we go into the presidential election in 2024. Say a Republican wins, then we'd have had two single-term presidents in a row. That in itself, formally even, just looking like you were saying at historical precedent, is a major shakeup. But how likely do you think that is, Ted? What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, it's a million miles away. But right now, if the election were tomorrow, I'd say we'd be looking at a Harris versus Trump campaign. And I would put my money on, I hate to say this, I'd put my money on Donald Trump.
Yes.
But,
it's very weird. I mean, when you think about it, when Obamacare was passed, I think they missed or they lost 20 different Democrats when they got it through the House. And they were still able to get it through the Senate. I don't remember the exact numbers in the Senate. But this time around, Pelosi only has 2 or 3 Democrats that she can give up in the House in order to get it passed. And look, but Pelosi has her votes. She's not going to bring it up without it. The catch becomes the Senate, where you also have this kind of unity with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 of the Democrats. What's changed over this? Corporate Democrats didn't typically back policies like this. Oftentimes they would backpedal and everything else. But for this, I mean, they seem to have either come to a conclusion that either COVID changed something or that it was in their interest to pass something where they can basically point to somebody's wallet and say, hey, this is what we did for you. I mean, what's changed over the course of, let's say, the last 4 or 5 years where these guys have come around with this kind of unity of thought along the stimulus?
I think the fact that Democrats and Republicans, both in Congress and among the electorate and in grassroots voters, love stimulus in the COVID era, and they love infrastructure, right? So it's popular. So I think it's a no-risk calculus. Infrastructure has basically been neglected in this country since the New Deal. Yeah. It's been nearly a century. Nothing's happened, really. We haven't really built anything significant in this country. Every other modern country has high-speed rail and so on. We still haven't really gotten started on it. So I think, they know that this is something that they can do. It'll be expensive, but I think most voters understand that, these things are long neglected and necessary, and they get it. They studied the New Deal in history. These things create jobs. It'll be good for everyone.
Well, would there be consequences if they don't pass it? That's the part to me that doesn't entirely make sense for Semina and for Manchin. I mean, basically, Democrats would be more vulnerable not passing it as opposed to less vulnerable. Or tell me if I'm wrong. It just seems like the leverage on this situation is losing control of the Senate and the House.
I don't think the specifics of this particular bill really matter. I think this bill could go down the toilet, and if Democrats had other stuff to show for it by fall of 2022, it would be fine. If they did something meaningful with health care or whatever. So I think it's not about this particular bill. It's about just having things, accomplishments and achievements that you can point to and say, these are the things we did for the American people. This is our legacy. We've been working hard, and the American people come out of their 2 years, their every 2-year slumber to vote and say, okay, yeah, we've outsourced our politics to these folks, and they've taken care of it. That's the problem. This is probably their best chance to get something significant on the scoreboard. And if they blow it, there's not going to be anything to point to.
What about, another side of this conversation, the debt ceiling and the impending doom that is the government shutdown. And I believe it was Mitch McConnell, whose turtly voice we were listening to earlier. He sounded pretty serious going into this. Said, this has usually been a game of chicken, right? And usually at the last moment, everything's let up. The sun has broken through the clouds. And we've come out the other side. But what do you think is going to happen this time, Ted?
Well, I'm just going to say, the game of chicken usually ends after people can't take their kids to national parks or do the White House tour for a while. So we may get to that point again. This one feels more serious somehow. It really feels like we're staring down into something that feels a little bit like fiscal apocalypse. I'm worried this time. I think there's just a high level of nonsense and stupidity on both sides that is just threatened to derail us. I mean, the pig-headedness on, particularly on the Republican side, but not uniquely. This could really be a thing. We really could default.
Yeah, Mark Zandi, chief economist for Moody's Analytics, found that prolonged impasse over the debt ceiling could cost the United States up to 6 million jobs and wipe out $15 trillion in household wealth and send unemployment rates surging to 9% from around 5%. That's catastrophic, to put it mildly. And I agree with you. Back when they first started doing this under Obama, where they're like, I'm not going to allow 1 red cent to, be on the back of my grandkids or something like that. And then, of course, immediately when Trump gets in office, they raise it by like $9 trillion or something. But back during that time, it seemed that McConnell was using this more so as a grift or as a tactic without a willingness to go over it. I mean, at the point where Obama says, well, I'm not negotiating on a debt ceiling. This was bills that both of parties incurred. I'm not going to negotiate on this. Well, they started getting really edgy towards the end of that. I mean, they started getting really, anxious and everything else, and it became pretty clear that McConnell wanted that to go over. On this, it seems that they've gotten thoroughly comfortable with the idea of basically blowing through the debt ceiling. And it does feel more serious. I mean, what's changed between then to now. I mean, they recognize, I mean, McConnell has been in Congress long enough to know the consequences of going through the debt ceiling. I mean, is his calculus he's not going to get blamed for it? I mean, what's the thought behind this?
Well, it's not McConnell's thought is the answer to your question. I mean, just a few weeks ago, McConnell was saying there was no way that we weren't going to raise the debt ceiling, right? And so this was not a crisis a few weeks ago. And then suddenly he changed. He did a 180, and now we're headed. The train's going over the cliff. And clearly, the difference is inside his conference. He's been told by the hardliners within the GOP, we're not sorry, Mitch, we're not going along. You're going to have to go back and go out in front of the cameras and tell them we're not going. So it's an internal division within the Republican Party, and he's just reflecting his conference. But he definitely does not think this is a good idea.
And so, okay, so here's the thing then. We have been talking about this as if he were playing chicken, right? Last week when we were talking about this, the presumption is, oh, it's just another time. Again, maybe we're over analyzing his voice or something and taking too many lessons away. But say for a second, any real political player who's watching the scene, including the top-ranking Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they realize, oh crap, this is serious. They're actually going to do this. If that's the realization that they're having right now, what do you think they're going to do with that, Ted?
Well, I mean, McConnell did say, and it is true, that the Democrats don't really need Republicans to raise the debt ceiling. They can put it inside their own bill. They can build that proviso, and they can just take the heat for it, right? Basically, they want bipartisan cover for raising the debt ceiling. They want to be able to say, look, we don't want any attack ads that say, Democrats increased the national debt by trillions of dollars. Republicans tried to vote no. They don't want those ads to run next fall. And so that's really what this is about. And that's why I said both parties have responsibility here. Pelosi doesn't need Republicans in order to get the debt ceiling raised. It's just that in order to do it, she's going to have to, her party will have to assume full responsibility for doing it. And it's going to take us into a new place where, whatever amount of comedy there used to be between the two parties where they would both allow each other to tax and spend to oblivion is going to go away. And it's going to become, every time your party spends a lot, you're going to have to raise the debt ceiling and take the heat for it.
Yeah, but this is for bills that have already been accrued, though. I mean, even the COVID bills that was under Trump or to some level, this is stuff that Republican Party have voted with the Democrats in order to enact. Do you think they're going to go through with this, meaning from the standpoint of Democrats? Are they just going to pass this, through budget reconciliation, I suppose, if they have the power to do it? And is it a foregone conclusion that they actually do have the power to do it? I mean, I saw McConnell basically saying, yeah, Democrats can do that on their own. But is that true? I mean, is there a legal precedent for them not being able to do that on their own through budget reconciliation?
I didn't do the deepest dive on this, but I did look into it. And it does, I'll just say, as an editorial cartoonist, I'm not a lawyer, but it does look to me like they can definitely, McConnell's right, Democrats can do this. I also think, Pelosi and the Democrats need to drink something, that gives them some, more oomph and and some courage, because I don't think it's really going to be that dangerous. I don't think the American people really pay much attention to the arcana of the debt ceiling bills and all that. They know that the rough contours of the issue, which is, hey, sometimes the government spends more than it takes in, and then that causes the debt to increase. But that's about it. And I think the Democrats could just say, fine, whatever, we'll just increase it, and we'll take the heat, and we'll have response ads, and we'll just call the Republicans irresponsible and willing to tank the economy. And we were trying to help people and build bridges, and leave it at that. I think Democrats are way too easily spooked, and that's something we could say about just about any issue.
Fair enough. Ted, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us. Good talking with you this morning.
Likewise.
And for those listening, that was Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. Follow him on Twitter at Ted Rall. Check out his cartoons and articles at rall.com. That's RALL.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we will be speaking with Michelle Witte, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of Political Misfits, show airing here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Miss Witte on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. And, we're trying to get Michelle Witte on the line. We're working on it, talking about the German elections with her. This is going to take a while to sort out because even though the SPD won, technically, they have, over 25% of the vote, which it's not a majority. Even though they're out in the lead in terms of the parties with which they're competing, any combination of those parties that can manage to create a coalition, broadly speaking, could theoretically push them out. So if the CDU, CSU goes along with the Greens, goes along with FDP, that gives them over 50%. And in my simple appraisal, that would mean the SPD isn't in power.
Yeah.
You don't get to choose the chancellor. And so we're talking about all that stuff. Right now, we're planning on bringing Michelle Witte on. Anyway, Jamarl.
Because there's only like a 1% difference in the number of, in the voting thing. I think it was like 25% to like 24%. I'm just on average. So it's not like there's a huge number of difference in the number of members that these guys are going to be able to bring on. And so, yeah, it's going to boil down to what governing coalition they can come up with in order to take power. And up to this point, as far as I know, it's unclear. You may have the CDU coming back into power, or you could have the SPD coming into power. It's unknown, and it can take months. That's the other part. So it should be interesting either way. Especially, I got to be honest, for me, I am thoroughly interested in what does it mean, what is Germany without Merkel? Because for the entirety of my political awareness, Merkel has always been there. She's been a fixture. What does it mean for Europe? I mean, for the longest time, Merkel has been the face of basically the European Union and European policy. Like her presence not being there is going to be somewhat jarring. What does it mean for France? Does France get a larger role in regards to the European politics? I mean, it's pretty interesting. I mean, Germany has been one of the main countries in regards to bringing Europe together and powerful in the context of Europe, especially from the standpoint of their economy and from the standpoint of, let's say, ideological association with this kind of closer together in the way that they were looking at Europe. But now that she's gone, how much of this was Merkel's dominance, putting her stamp on the European Union about what she wanted and how she believed Europe should function, as opposed to basically just European policy? I don't think people know, but we will be. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if people know. But at this point, we're going to find out pretty soon with whoever takes power. It should be interesting. And I'm also curious how the public sees this. I mean, many of the people, when I was in Germany, they saw Angela Merkel as somewhat of a statesman. And the guy who I was talking to, I believe one of the cab drivers, made the point about, yeah, they didn't want the immigrants coming into the country. They thought it was too many, but there's not enough Germans to do the jobs that are necessary in order to keep the German economy moving. And so it was ultimately a good choice. Like, I would imagine there's going to be divides in regards to the way people see it. But it seems that Germany's still going to remain stable either way. Excellent.
We have her with us. Michelle Witte, thank you for joining us. Some of your last days here in Berlin. We're good. How are you doing this morning, Michelle?
Just fine. Fine. Trying to, see what is sort of slowly unfolding here.
And let's get right into it. Thank you for being with us here. Thank you for joining us. What is slowly unfolding there? What do you see? What's happened since we spoke yesterday, Michelle?
I mean, not a ton. There's a little bit of controversy over Laschet, the CDU candidate. not yet, at least as of a couple hours ago, not having congratulated the SPD candidate for Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. So, kind of leaving open the idea that they are still going to try to form a government still seems unlikely. But it is also kind of pointing to maybe, I think the result of the election makes clear that the CDU has a lot of introspection to do and a lot of sort of internal questions to answer. And you can kind of see these cracks forming where you've had at least two members of the party come out and publicly say Laschet needs to.
Michelle? Okay. Hopefully we can get Michelle back. There might have just been a little bit of a glitch. But basically, a little bit of drama around the people who basically won versus the runner-ups in the contest. And just so we're clear, the CDU was Angela Merkel's party. So the reason why this may be taking a certain degree of precedent is because Angela Merkel's party had been there at this point for 16 years. And at this point, they are no longer, at least as we know of, at the very least, they didn't have the majorities to basically retain power. But again, they may still end up empowering the government depending upon the breakdown of how Parliament breaks down. So, very interesting stuff.
The problem is that every what was that, Andre?
She's gone.
Okay. The problem is that every leader here, every leader of one of these parties, any of the obvious chancellor picks have baggage. They have problems that would keep them from being another Merkel. And right now, Europe seems increasingly listless, with France getting a bit more anti-US-y, even if that's just rhetorical.
Yeah.
With Ursula von der Leyen, who knows how much of this is real, trying to push for strategic independence for Europe in a broad sense for the EU, which has huge problems. Merkel has been a unifying force there. Macron is much less of a unifying force.
Yes.
And so it's like Europe is losing its leader.
Yeah.
Isn't that part of what's going on here?
That's what it feels like. I mean, or at the very least, losing a leader that had such presence in regards to representing Europe, in the face of Europe. Because Angela Merkel wasn't just a dominant power in Germany. That's the catch, right? It's not like just some random world leader in a particular country. It's her stamp was on Europe proper. And I got to be honest, I don't think they even know what that means yet. Like, going forward, like what's going to be the politics of Germany after Merkel? What's the politics of Europe after Merkel? Who's going to have, this kind of dominant share in regards to perspective of where Europe is going? And I don't necessarily think they know that. Michelle, welcome back.
Hi, I'm here. Yes, I blame Skype 100% for that one.
Fair enough.
I was listening to what you were saying. I think here's the thing. Germany is still the biggest economy, right? I don't think that there's any chance that it, retreats from a position of leadership. I think a lot of what was going on here is it's sort of understood that Germany is going to continue to be basically the leader of Europe just by virtue of its economic power. Yeah. But it would have been unseemly to try to campaign for that role in this election, it felt like. So it's sort of like, I think that's one of the reasons a lot of foreign policy questions and questions of sort of international leadership didn't really come up, because it's sort of I think it's a given that Germany will continue to be extremely important and will continue to lead. But they have so many domestic questions at home that I think that focusing on foreign policy was never going to happen one way or another.
I guess I can understand that. But Germans have to know that Angela Merkel had a certain point of view in regards to foreign policy, especially in regards to Europe itself or Europe proper. There would likely be some kind of changeover, or would there be? Is it just a situation where, no, German policy will be German policy, whether it's Merkel, Laschet, or Schloss?
There will be a little bit of a change, but nobody was out here calling for like a wholesale change with the relationship with the United States, for example. Absolutely not. And certainly the people didn't vote for anyone who was suggesting great change, right? It's not like the SPD is advocating for a different relationship with the United States at all. Some things that could happen, if you do get the leader of the FDP, Christian Lindner, in as finance minister, which he really wants, one of the people I spoke to who voted for him did so precisely because he was tired of recklessness in the Eurozone, right? And so these questions of the financing of the EU and what the EU does to sort of maintain economic balance among the different members. Now, those could go very differently depending on what policies actually make it into any coalition, certainly that the FDP is part of. And so that is going to be an interesting question for Europe specifically. But Germany's been involved in those questions for a long time anyway. And I mean, yeah, the figure, like, you can see how separated the figure of Merkel is with the rest of her party. I mean, the CDU lost her former constituency, you know? I mean, they had voted for her every time, but they weren't going to vote for her party in the end.
That's interesting. Why?
I mean, I think, again, because there's been a real separation between Merkel and the CDU, and now with, post-Merkel, the CDU really has to reassert who it is and where it positions itself on the sort of spectrum of politics. I think we were talking about Merkel's having pulled the CDU a little bit to the left, and now there will be a question as to whether that's where they stay, whether they pull back into more traditional territory. And I think, likely these will be, maybe it is a good time for that party to spend some time in opposition, and not having to work inside a coalition, but instead to define itself a little bit more clearly for the German electorate.
Michelle, when you dropped for a second, Jamarl and I got into this conversation about Merkel as the spiritual leader of Europe, and with her departure, and none of the candidates for chancellor seeming like they could at all fill her seat, like a big matter for Germany, but also a big matter for Europe in general. I'm curious, speaking with people there, what's their take on that idea? Do they seem self-conscious of that? Is that a thing that gets brought up, or are they, is that not their frame for this?
That wasn't a frame that I heard. And I think part of it is just sort of like self-effacement, as I was saying before. It just would be a little bit unseemly to be talking about who's going to be the new face of Europe, and of course that face coming from Germany. But no, I mean, again, like this was really a vote for parties rather than individuals, because I think the one thing that has been really clear from this election campaign is that none of the individuals were particularly popular or liked. There's a little bit of holding of the nose. Scholz least among them, I think. But for the rest, there was some real antipathy.
Very interesting. So what do you think happens here? I'm curious. Also, the breakdown. What was the absolute number from the standpoint of parliamentary members that each group is going to get? I know because the numbers were so close to one another. How does that look in regards to people?
I mean, it will be really close. I mean, technically, as it stands, the SPD and the CDU could just barely form a majority in if they were to do another grand coalition of just the two of them. It seems like that's going to be unlikely, but they could do that. I don't know that the numbers are, there's still postal votes being counted. So again, I don't know that those are completely solid yet.
That's fair.
Michelle Witte, thank you for joining us. Good conversation, good talking with you this morning. You're coming back Thursday, right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Hope you have a great day today, evening today, I suppose, and a great day tomorrow. And we'll see you when you get back to the studio.
All right. Thanks so much. See you then.
See you then. And for those listening, that was Michelle Witte. She is political analyst, also co-host and host here on Sputnik of the show Political Misfits. Check that every Monday through Friday from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. Good talking with her there. See, it's been a while, Jamarl, when we were during the pandemic, when we were all at home, basically, people aren't traveling. The borders are literally locked down. But we send correspondence places. You yourself, you were in Geneva, having a grand old time.
Yeah, and we're going to, on some level, it's funny that you mentioned that, the Putin summit, the Putin-Biden summit, and the agreement that these guys made in order to have these kind of workshops moving forward. They're about to have another one.
Yeah.
So we're going to get the opportunity to talk to Mark about it.
Second round of meeting.
But they were shutting that stuff down, and now they're trying to reopen the world of sorts.
It's true, and hopefully is another angle on it. Hopefully that's good for world diplomacy. I guess our leaders don't seem to be as limited as we are in terms of what they do and how they choose to, whether they wear masks, whether they travel, that kind of thing. But so much diplomacy gets done face to face, Yeah. Anyway, we got to close this one out. We'll be back in a minute in our last hour with headlines and the last hour of this morning's show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly fragmenting surface of our globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And what that almost certainly means is you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There we go. All right, folks, it's September 28th. It's almost October. I hope folks are getting their Halloween decorations out and ready to put up on October 1st. I know a lot of people are looking forward to that one. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern this morning here in Washington, D.C., and it's now time for COVID stats. We're getting into our headlines. First up, we have about 195,000 new COVID cases reported yesterday in the United States. There were also 2,380 deaths reported. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 117,966 cases per day, about a decrease of 33% from the average taken 2 weeks earlier. 55% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,100,000 people across the United States, and it's killed 690,558 people here in the U.S. Pfizer-BioNTech, the large pharmaceutical company, has started large-scale testing of a new oral drug for COVID-19 prevention and protection. The pill is designed to block key receptors the virus needs to duplicate, allowing the body to fight the original source of that duplication. The pill is designed as a preventative measure for those believing they have been exposed but who are not ill yet. As Bob Schlehuber describes it, this is like a COVID Plan B medication to keep COVID from reproducing in your body, basically. In national news, Senate Republicans sank the short-term government funding debt limit bill. Congress is 72 hours away from a potential shutdown in order to pass this. Before that happens, Democrats are now expected to strip the bill of raising the debt limit in order to get it passed. President Biden received his third dose of the COVID-19 vaccine yesterday, taking the booster shot manufactured by Pfizer-BioNTech. This comes after an FDA panel recommended the shots for people ages 65 and older, or those at high risk or in jobs that puts them at a risk of high transmission, being able to transmit it to a lot of people. In media/legal news, R&B ultra-star R. Kelly has been convicted of sex trafficking after nearly 3 decades of the alleged crime. He married then 15-year-old Aaliyah Dana Houghton in 1994. Prosecutors proved that the actions of managers and aides who helped Kelly meet more girls amounted to a criminal enterprise. Several women testified on the trial, saying they were subjected to perverse and sadistic whims while they were underage. And we had a great conversation about this at 7:30 this morning, by the way, with producers Austin Pelly and Cordell Woodland. John Hinckley Jr. is to be released after wounding President Ronald Reagan and 3 others in a failed assassination attempt 40 years ago in 1981. In 1982, Hinckley was found not guilty of the act due to mental insanity, and after 34 years served in a mental institution, has been granted unconditional release. However, Hinckley must have regular visits with doctors and psychologists to basically make sure he's still of sane mind, that kind of thing. He's still not going off that track, so to speak. Following on, in the remnants of Hurricane Ida, New York's undocumented immigrants can apply for aid from the $27 million disaster relief fund. Fewer than 1,200 households are expected to receive aid and should receive each around $72,000 if you do the averages. Mayor Bill de Blasio stated, quote, "Regardless of documentation status, we will get support to the most recent victims of our climate crisis and are here to help every step of the way," end quote. In local news, Mayor Muriel Bowser has announced an extension of the ticket amnesty program until the end of the year. The district will remove penalties on parking and minor moving violations and allow you to pay only the original amount. Any tickets received since June 1st or until the end of the year are affected. Mayor Bowser stated that this has been a vital program in helping out residents and has had more than 32,000 participants. Tomorrow morning, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley, and Head of U.S. Central Command General Kenneth McKenzie are set to testify at the Senate Armed Services Committee. Lawmakers on both sides will be probing the group for the Biden administration's hazardous and embarrassing military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Speaking of which, in international news, the head of one of Afghanistan's largest banks said that the sector was near collapse. Speaking from Dubai, while in Afghanistan itself, the banks are the sites of repeated runs by anxious members of the public looking to withdraw funds. With more withdrawals than contributions and a dwindling ability to pay out the withdrawals, the chief executive of the Islamic Bank of Afghanistan warned of an existential crisis, quote unquote. In the city of Milan, climate activists beat war drums against older generations for failing to avert climate change. Speakers there included Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, alongside hundreds of other predominantly young attendees. This also follows, I was trying to get the polling this morning, and I just couldn't get it in time. But Jamarl, over the weekend, did you by any chance see this polling with like attitudes of young people on whether or not the world was ending, basically?
I didn't see the world was anything. I've seen polling on whether or not they believe climate change was like significant or whether it was a big deal or whether it was, but no, not specifically the world was ending.
Let me qualify that slightly. Not literally in a the world is about to explode sense, but like humanity will go extinct basically. And it was like just over a majority of people, if I remember correctly, were saying yes to it. I'm being hesitant here because I don't have the numbers in front of me. I was trying to find them and I couldn't find the exact thing. But it was I was reading about it over the weekend. Totally valid study. Just interesting, man, and depressing.
Yeah, I mean, and I would imagine young kids may have a higher number that may think. I mean, because basically they're going to be there for it. Hell or high water, they're probably going to be in existence at the point where things start to get that much more worse. So yeah, they probably are concerned. I mean, that's probably why you have so many younger kids that are so more interested in the climate change debate. Actually, that, but also because they don't have the other responsibilities where their focal point would be on things that are immediate, like jobs and wealth and that type of stuff. So for them, climate may take more precedent. But yeah, I mean, they're going to be around when that stuff takes hold. I don't blame them.
All right, and we have two more headlines here. One, in Earth and Science news, a fireball passed over the East Coast last night, traveling over 32,000 miles per hour. Fireballs are another name for meteors that are so bright they illuminate more than Venus. That's the brightest planet visible from Earth in our solar system. After traveling 26 miles in Earth's atmosphere, the fireball disintegrated while on its course. This was, after completing its course, whatever. This was over South Carolina. Just interesting. And in our last headline this morning, in the category titled Best News Ever, this is from our producer, Austin. He says, and I quote, I'm not going to try to imitate your voice, Austin. Quote, I have no idea why I'm even here at work today and not celebrating because today is National Drink a Beer Day. Seems a shame not to celebrate this momentous day with a very close multi-friend of mine. I have never felt more patriotic. Grab a brewski for me, listeners. End quote. And again, that's from Austin Pelly, our producer. Oh, man. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
One of my old companies used to do that. Used to give beer in the morning. Was it one of my companies? I don't know if it was one of my. No, it wasn't one of my companies. We had there's an office environment. It's kind of like, think of like an independent office environment where anybody can go work at the place. Sometimes people who would work remotely or work from home would prefer not to work in the house. And so they would have offices where people can pay a certain amount of money for each year or each weeks or so, and they would be able to work there. Beer was on tap because what they found was like beer, pot, those type of things gives this kind of intellectual boost of creativity and thinking when it's not enough to make the person high, but enough to give the person a tweak. It's hard to explain, but this was one of those things that they found that alcohol had that sort of effect. And so they would have beer on tap.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I can see it in its own way. Yeah, Austin found the study. This was from last week, actually. Climate anxiety. How worried are you about climate change? 27%, this is of young people, kids, teens, etc. 27% extremely worried, 32% very worried, 25% moderately worried, whatever. The main takeaway from that one is that about half of the people, and I just want to make sure I have the right reference here, about half of the people think humanity is doomed. That's about half of young kids, which if it is big news in its own way.
I don't see the turn. And maybe that's what they are too.
What do you mean?
Like, because at a certain point, when you think of something is getting resolved or somebody cares about a particular issue, as you're looking into the future, you say, okay, I can see where the line starts to trend in a different direction in order to get a different outcome. I don't see that. I mean, I don't see that at all. I mean, scientists are very clear at this point about the climate issue. They're very clear about the effects of it, meaning the fires, the floods, the higher water level, the decrease in nutrients within the crops because of the carbon that we're putting into the air. It's like junk food to plants. Like that stuff is pretty straightforward from a scientific perspective, but from an ideological perspective, where cash is the thing that matters, cash, the world conforms around how do we make more and more profit. The change doesn't seem to be there. It just doesn't seem to be part of the conversation in real terms. You would get organizations that would say, hey, we're also going to be an advocate for this. And it would be like, one of the industries that are basically causing it. But I don't see this thing where legislation or whether there's this kind of world come to Jesus moment where they're like, all right, look, we need to do something different because it is going to be so much more expensive and our lives are going to get so much more miserable if we don't. I just don't see that taking place.
Yes. Well, here's my one hope is that the United States, the major world superpower, who is obviously right now becoming one of a number of major world superpowers, but whatever. The United States, seeing its decline and China's rise, at some point within the next decade or two, makes a big swerve. Now, if you look at China, they're not doing enough to combat climate change, but it seems like that's, I don't know.
They have more power.
My hope here, what'd you say?
Well, they have more power. I mean, it's the government can take its lead. Yeah. Like they don't have to. I was like, all right, we got to get this industry and this industry and this industry. Basically, China just mandates it in.
And if you remember when we were talking with Michelle about Germany, and she was like, well, people want stability. German political system wants stability. German voters want stability. They don't want a big change up. If you look at what China values, it is stability first and foremost. What the Chinese political system values is stability. Now, if you look at historically, and just going back thousands of years, the history of the various incarnations of the Chinese state, what have been the big threats to stability? Well, in a lot of cases, drought, famine, issues that would undoubtedly be exacerbated by climate change. Yeah. And so the hope here is that they start to make efforts. We, seeing them, rising, we reform our political system, and then with that newly reinvigorated national whatever, we start to take efforts, and pretty soon you have the world's largest and most powerful players taking massive action. That's the hope. And that's where I feel like maybe this shouldn't happen, because here's another thing. I don't know, doom can be a self-perpetuating prophecy. Yes. If you feel consistently depressed and malaised and like you're hopeless and everything is hopeless, then what do? Not all that much. You just sort of use whatever as a palliative to make your life tolerable for as long as you're living. If on the other hand, you're like, the world is tough, there are all these problems, but I believe we can do it. I believe I can do it. I believe you can do it, that kind of thing. That's a completely different energy. And I wish we had more of that.
Yeah, but the problem is it's diffuse. It's like who's responsible for homelessness? It's that type of stuff. It's like, the majority of the people say that's a horrible outcome. We don't necessarily like that. But whose fault is it? And it's the fault thing where it gets so smeared out where it doesn't necessarily seem any one particular person or even one country has the power to do it. And so it's like it takes a certain degree of cooperation that doesn't seem to be there. I mean, even the money thing, like if it takes trillions of dollars to do it, okay, who pays the trillions of dollars? And this is something that we get together, and we couldn't even get the Paris Accords. What was it called? Paris Accords, if I'm not mistaken.
Paris Climate Accords?
Yeah, we couldn't even get that. And that wasn't even, there was no teeth in that at all. And it's like even just trying to get the countries to live up to that was modest and didn't necessarily seem to be something that worked all that well. And if we can't even do that, then what's the real work of the trying to do something about climate or trying to transform our country? I don't know, man. I am pessimistic about it, but I accept the point. Like having this kind of perspective of, okay, this task is so big. Well, at a certain point when tasks are so big, it makes people not even try because they don't think they can do anything about it. But yeah, I just don't see the turn. And that's unfortunate. But I accept your point.
The turn, what we're going to do here in the United States in a couple of years is we're going to wise up. We're going to implement massive land reform across the vast tracts of America's Great Plains. And we're going to have bison. We're going to have free-ranging bison, massive herds of free-ranging bison that restore our prairies, that bring climate out of the atmosphere and into the soil, deepening the topsoil, and everything will be better, Jamarl.
It's just going to transform into loveliness.
That's what we're going to happen.
The bison thing is interesting to me, but I don't necessarily know. The bison thing is interesting to me. The catch becomes land. Like, is it going to be a situation where people are willing to give up their land?
No, government takes it. That's the thing. That's what's going to happen.
Eminent domain.
No, I mean, this is one possible scenario. I don't think that's the way to do it, if I'm being honest with you. But you know what? I have talked about this before, and I was mostly doing this as a pattern interrupt because we have, I want to make sure we get to our guest pretty quickly and don't dawdle on headlines. Mm-hmm. But there is this idea of, reparations for Black Americans. And, there's this conversation even there, American descendants of slaves versus all Black Americans, that kind of thing. The 40 acres and a mule promise back in the day. What if, there were this large-scale program to distribute freed-up property, and the only string attached, basically, you can come and take it. We just want you to take care of it. Yeah. Enrich the land that you're living on, that kind of thing. I don't know, man. I'm trying to think big here. I don't think the government should just take away all these people's land, though, to be clear.
I don't think anything's wrong with that premise. I mean, if you think of farmers and everything else, it's an interesting premise. I mean, but with upkeep of the land, but see, that's just it. I don't think upkeep of the land in and of itself deals with the issue of climate. I mean, the majority of climate is 70% of those things are industry. It's not just Americans going about their way. And it's so I don't see how you corral that part. That's the part, the way I'm at a loss on. How do you corral industry to get the industry to focus not necessarily as profit as this highest measure, but that you have to take into account environmental circumstances and you pursue the profit. And that part seems to be the lagging part. And it doesn't necessarily seem either laws or policy, especially since those laws and policies are basically governed by people who are paying for those laws and those policies. It doesn't seem to be a turn. I don't want to be overly pessimistic on it, but
it seems like we're probably going to imitate the Chinese, which is sadly going to look like a lot of bad things and some good things too. Mm-hmm. I mean, unless you see me going wrong. We're over time here, and I want to make sure we come back to our guest. Mm-hmm. So let's do it. Those were our headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. We're going to be talking about upcoming talks taking place later this week between the United States and Russia over strategy going forward, arms reduction, and the military situation between the two countries in general, basically resuming talks after a long, increasingly icy relationship culminating in Russiagate. We'll be talking with Mark Sloboda about that and more. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So picking up from where we left off in the last conversation, we have new talks that are coming up between the United States and Russia. Now, if you remember, Biden called for a Putin summit, Putin U.S. or the United States and Russia summit. That summit did take place in Geneva, Switzerland, and there were agreements, nothing necessarily hard, but definitely agreements to persist in having talks. Well, the first set of talks were finished, and we're coming up on the second set of talks that are supposed to take place within the next few weeks. The State Department said that the two sides intend to have deliberate and robust dialogue that will seek to lay groundwork for future arms control, risk reduction measures. But there wasn't necessarily too much more information beyond that. So to have a conversation about it, we're joined with Mark Sloboda. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. And one of our favorite people, especially on the issue of geopolitics. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Jamarl, Shane, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
Excellent. So later this week, apparently the United States and Russia are going to begin the second level of talks. I guess this boils down into two questions. The first level of talks, what was accomplished, and what is expected to be accomplished, or at the very least, what is the goal of the second level of conversations?
Yes. Okay. So with the first round of talks, what was accomplished? Simply the fact that they sat down and began discussing things again. That was pretty much it. There was no other real accomplishment. That alone, the fact that they were going to deal with each other on a semi-respectful basis, sitting across a table, negotiating on serious security matters, rather than yelling at each other through the pages of social media and government pronouncements, directed at each other. That is already a bit of an accomplishment, considering how bad tensions have got between the two countries in recent years. These talks are are essentially arms control talks, although they're being viewed as a little bit broader as strategic discussions, so that they include both the use of nuclear strategic weapons, but also cybersecurity, space, artificial intelligence, and other joint matters of security concern like that. But as the basis in the idea of arms control talks, this is what the U.S. and Russia, or the Soviet Union before it, always fall back on as the most basic level of discourse that is absolutely necessary between the two countries when they can't talk about or agree on anything else. It's kind of like, the lowest common denominator, that we agree to talk about these issues. What is expected from these talks? Nothing. Nothing is expected other than for the conversation and the exchange of views to continue. But there are several intractable issues on both sides. For Russia, the main one is missile defense. If the U.S. Isn't talking about missile defense, isn't including its inclusion in the possibility, then for Russia it's pointless, because all of their advances in hypersonic weapons and so forth are an asymmetric response to the U.S. deployment of missile defense in Europe after unilaterally pulling out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, defense treaty. And from the U.S. side, they are really not interested in any type of agreement with Russia that might possibly tie their hands with China. That would really limit the scope of any agreements. They want China dragged into everything. And Russia says, well, first of all, we don't have the ability to drag China into anything. I mean, they're our friend, but we can't demand that they enter into strategic level arms control talks. We can't do that. And then Russia also adds, but if you want to bring in China, well, then you have to bring in the UK and France and other Western countries, like Israel and aligned countries like India that also have nuclear weapons and higher other strategic issues.
Couple questions here, Mark, but I'll just start it off with this. When did these kinds of talks last take place between the United States and the Russian Federation, and what has happened in the intervening period of time that would change, in what ways is the U.S. impression going to be outdated? What basis are they going to be acting upon based on their last interactions, if that's a valid way to look at this? And the same would hold for Russia, too. Yep. Mark.
Well, during the Obama years, there was the signing of the New START treaty, which was just renewed under Joe Biden. There were Trump, Russia discussions on the New START treaty, but Trump had no real desire to renew the last of this Cold War security architecture without extending it out into other areas that Russia wasn't willing to consider. So that ended with nothing, and then Joe Biden quickly showing some sanity renewed the New START treaty so that we didn't have a return to a quantitative arms race as well as the qualitative arms race that we already have.
Let me ask you this. Are you concerned with what's taking place right now in regards to the missile system that they're talking about, this kind of secretive special access project of some kind of weapon in space that they've been talking about, I think for maybe a year or so, that they're talking about disclosing? Yeah, the arms, I mean, I guess the whole conversation about a quantitative arms race, well, it seems like it's going to start on some level there, right? I mean, the weapons in space thing is terrifying, to put it mildly, with something basically floating over people's heads. That's going to basically force the other countries to basically put up their own weapons or to have some mitigating response to it, correct?
Yeah, the only talk about this is the idea is the U.S.'s basic government is basically floating the idea to the press that they might go public about already existing space weapons programs, and that is the big deal here, because the reality is that the U.S. and Russia and China and some other countries that are just a little bit behind the ball, like the EU, already have weapons in space. All right, space is already weaponized. It's just a matter of how public about it we're going to go and how much further we're going to go. And there's two basic types of space weapons that we're talking here. One is the use of weapons, often satellites themselves, against other countries' satellites, because satellites are absolutely necessary for modern warfare, and the ability to take out an opponent's satellites is crucial in gaining the strategic upper hand at any future conventional or strategic conflict. The other type is the idea of putting weapons in space that can then target assets back on Earth. And all sides are also working on that and may already have some things deployed that aren't, generally acknowledged, or there's not direct evidence of in the public sphere.
Mark, I want to go back to this because I don't feel like we really got into it. The New START treaty was basically a notable exception to long-term distance. I don't know how else to put it. Russiagate was, I would say, the culmination of this stuff, and it seems to have petered after that, where we're more willing to talk to the Russian side. But the deal being signed, being renewed back in April of this year is a big deal, and it's a very good thing. But that is not ongoing long-term talks. When was the last time we had a serious set of talks with our Russian counterparts, and in the way that it seems we're trying to enter into now?
Well, I mean, if you want to go back to broader strategic level discussions, beyond the initiation of New START by the Obama administration, then of course we're going back to the Cold War, or at least the very end of the Cold War period, more substantial in the early years. But Russia, after the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia kind of fell off the U.S.'s strategic radar for quite a long period of time. So in this way, it's kind of acknowledging offhandedly that Russia is back again as a not a superpower, but as a great power that the U.S. has to deal with these strategic level discussions.
So if I were to take those words at face value, it would sound like this is something like 30 years, 30, 40 years, call it 30 years. That's how important this kind of event is. It's been 30 years since we've had this level of talks with our Russian counterparts.
Absolutely, but this is also the first time that the U.S. is acknowledging that they are facing a peer adversary that they need to bother to talk with.
Interesting. I mean, speaking of the peer adversary thing, I want to talk about the Quad for a moment. We had this conversation on AUKUS, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also this other
Not New Zealand.
Not New Zealand. Okay, I'm sorry. Australia,
it's the
UK.
U.S. Australia, Japan, and India.
That's what it was. Okay. And
AUKUS, the new one, is the U.S., the UK, and Australia.
Right. And the Quad is the one that I was going to. Basically, these overlapping systems to, I guess, to mitigate in the way that the United States would say is China. And like you said, this one has to do with Australia, India, United States.
And Japan.
And Japan. Questioning on this from the standpoint of, we are trying to make this argument that China needs to be restrained and that having these overlapping organizations is a way of restraining China in this case. But is this a restraint or is this a provocation? At the point where they're creating these kind of systems and groups that are pointed and targeted, it looks like it would create a certain level of conflict as opposed to having this thing of mitigating conflict.
Yeah, there's two levels of discussion going on here. On the most, foremost government messaging, officially, the Quad is not an anti-China containment bloc, right? They will insist that as long, government officials as the day is long. At the same time as, all of, the think tank, the top level media and security people in the blob and so forth are all talking about the Quad and AUKUS exactly as that. That of course is the real reason for it. So there is a bit of subterfuge going on, at least at a very surface level by the governments. But absolutely, this is from the U.S. view, China needs to be contained to China. They're not allowed to have any influence beyond the borders of China, and there's some questions, about their legitimacy to do that, even in, places like Hong Kong and certainly Taiwan, which while officially the U.S. still recognizes the one China policy, it has long been, 180'd into a promotion of separatism of Taiwan from China militarily even. So there is a sense that, China is the enemy that we need to pivot all of our military to face because China's economy is starting to overshadow ours. They are winning the economic race. That cannot be allowed because military strength follows from economic strength. And China is building their military, and that challenges U.S. primacy in the world, and that cannot be allowed. So there needs to be, it is inevitable, there is a Thucydides trap, referring to the ancient Greek political philosopher, between a falling hegemon and a rising hegemon. And that's from the U.S. point of view. From the Chinese point of view, they are an import-export country. With maritime trade is absolutely essential to their economy for providing for their own domestic population, much less any broader goals. They need, to secure those trade routes. They can't have them in the control of an adversarial power. Same thing with Taiwan. Taiwan they view as a longtime part of China, and they simply can't allow situation to continue where the U.S. turns that into a giant military platform, like a giant aircraft carrier pointed right into the heart of China itself. So those are two kind of intractable positions. And, basically we're back to a new Cold War style idea of containment. And now the U.S. has put itself into the trap of, as the hegemon, trying to contain, as it sees it, Russia and China and India at the same time, whereas those countries see it as the U.S. trying to strangle them and assert global hegemony at the same time.
That makes sense. And speaking of Taiwan, it seems, I was reading earlier, it's simple. If China can get Taiwan diplomatically, that will be a clear victory. If they have to take it by force, that's a lot more questionable whether or not they would be willing to do that. But crucially, like you're saying, if there's an aircraft carrier, if it's a proverbial island carrier, that the United States is preparing to use, that's a big threat, and they would want to curtail that threat. They'd want to keep that from happening. But what signs are we seeing right now from the U.S.'s end? It seems like we've been making noise, but what am I missing? Have we been moving stuff there in large enough quantities that we're starting to seriously freak the Chinese out? Basically, I'm just trying to get what's the temperature on that situation right now?
There is an increasing amount of military aid sales being given to Taiwan. We have seen Taiwanese officials basically leak information. It's not even clear whether it's true or not that there's some 30,000 U.S. troops secretly stationed in Taiwan. We have seen increasing of this U.S. provocative naval parades between the Taiwan Straits and through the South China Sea under the euphemism of freedom of navigation exercises. And the U.S. has been, once again, testing the waters that they might actually recognize Taiwan as a separate country independent from China. And they have done that by talking about upgrading right now Taiwan's status in several documents about the way they think of it. But it's quite clearly attempted to sound out recognizing Taiwanese independence, which would probably be a red line provoking a military response, i.e. an invasion from China.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's provocative to put it mildly. From China's standpoint, how does China deal with a belligerent superpower in this? Meaning from a policy standpoint. I've spoken to some people who are Chinese who would talk about win-win relationships and everything else. And I would try to make the point to them that, the win-win relationship only matters if the other party that you're dealing with is looking for a win-win and is not looking to just outright win. They seem to have the need to change their tenor. So what is their strategy for dealing with the U.S. in this context? The win-win thing doesn't seem to apply.
Yeah, so China for decades now has basically been building its strength quietly by not directly confronting or even, directly disagreeing with the U.S. on anything. But, within the last decade, Chinese strength, particularly its economic strength, has reached the point where the U.S. no longer talks about win-win economics. The U.S. used to talk about that in the 90s when they were encouraging free trade and so forth. But now China is looking to shoot past the U.S. economically as the dominant economic power in the world. In fact, by several measures, they already are. And the U.S. suddenly no longer talks win-win. It's only China that's talking win-win. The U.S. no longer talks win-win. Now they're saying that, if China is a economically more powerful country than us, we can't allow that. It's simply, it cannot be allowed. So we have to use what we have, which is military, to try to, or political pressure to force other countries to decouple economically with China to do that. So China is starting to feel its strength. And the level of U.S. hysteria and military buildup in China's own backyard in the West Pacific, particularly again with Taiwan and the South China Sea, is provoking a buildup response from China, and so on and so on. We're caught in a spiral as China builds up, the U.S. builds up, and so on. And it all eventually, of course, leads to this new almost Cold War style arms race, military buildup in the West Pacific that we're seeing right now.
Mark, let's pivot for a second. I saw you posting about this, and Jamarl saw it too on your Twitter account, about Canada. And what was the story again, Jamarl? It was vaccine restrictions stuff?
Yes, so basically Canada uses COVID as a way of testing propaganda on its own population. And it's pretty wild, actually. They didn't even use the political space for it. The military itself saw it as an opportunity to go along with it. And so some of the documents that have just released, military commanders believed they didn't need to get approval from higher authorities to develop and proceed with their plan. Retired Major General Daniel Gosselin, who's brought in to investigate the scheme, concluded in the report. The propaganda plan was developed and put in place April 2020, even though the Canadian forces had already acknowledged that, quote, information operations and targeting policies and doctrines are aimed at adversaries and have a limited application in the domestic concept. Well, they are saying
limited application.
Right, exactly, right. I mean,
so this is coming from Canada's Joint Operations Command, CJOC. Yeah. And what is coming out through freedom of information laws, now only tentatively being reported by the Canadian press, is the fact that the Canadian military has been running military psychological operations over its own citizens. And, most recently there was a big escalation of this over the pandemic. But also emerging is that they have done this for several years now on various other topics. They created a false wolf scare in Nova Scotia, officially shut that psychological operations down. It was with a fake report about, wolves presenting a threat in the area. And then they continued it for another 6 months. They were also doing the same. They're monitoring political activists' dissent, like Black Lives Matter, but other political groups, collecting information on them. And then they're also going out to shape the information environment. There was a program to challenge those who wanted to critique the amount of money flowing to the military and demanding accountability for how it spends it. So this is the military directly defending itself by conducting, the big disagreement is here, whether it's merely information operations or whether it's psychological warfare. It's a very gray boundary, and they really amount to the same thing. Yeah. But the real issue here is the lack of outcry, the lack of journalistic, really screaming about this. It should, of course, be an extremely alarming matter. And the idea that the government, that the military did it without government approval is nonsense, right? That's smokescreen. That's the military falling on its sword without actually falling on its sword, because of course no one is being fired or held accountable for it, because the government of Justin Trudeau asked the Canadian Joint Operations Command to help them with the threat of civil unrest and so forth with the pandemic. To help shape the environment. And now they're saying, that they took those orders too liberally. Okay, that is smokescreen. That is providing political cover for the government for something that they clearly asked the military do to help, shape the minds of the Canadian people. And, how they don't go into directly how they're doing this, but we've seen this before with lots of leaks from Snowden and Wiki. We're talking, sock puppet armies, bots, fake web pages, and inserting, specifically reaching out to assets within journalism and think tank land to push perspectives in the public space.
It's about time. I've been waiting for Canada to follow our example here. It's taken them long enough. They were mired 50 years ago in the past or something like that. They needed to catch up and start using the internet to convince people of things that we want them to think. This is the lack of public outcry. Would you put that on the media not reporting it? That's column A, and then there's overlap between these two columns. Or column B, we, like many animals, are perfectly happy to be blinded, to put blinders on us and just, okay, we'll do whatever you want us to, basically. Is it, in other words, philosophically, is this the politics, the top-down politics of the situation, or is it just human nature or some combination of the two? Which would you blame?
I think it's definitely some combination of two, but it's become increasingly clear the power of the Fourth Estate as a political actor in all of our countries. When they apply scrutiny to something, the public could possibly react. When they deliberately don't report on something, or even worse, obfuscate matters, of course, then the public doesn't even have the information it needs to make a real reaction. So, but of course, with the commercial nature of most of media, the media also doesn't report on things that won't generate clicks and hits and money for them, ad revenue. So it's again a self-reinforcing circle.
Wow, Mark, I want to thank you for joining us for this. I mean, this is fascinating to me because, you know, there's been this kind of propaganda thing that's taken place on U.S. soil once before. It's just funny for some reason seeing this take place in Canada. Canada always gets this kind of reputation as being less willing to do stuff like this. And I guess that answer is pretty much no, they are perfectly willing to.
Maybe just not as good at it.
Yeah.
The media is just finally finding and reporting about it.
Yeah. So, Mark, I want to thank you for joining us. The voice that you guys were listening to is Mark Sloboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1 and find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Ramsheet. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be coming back, taking your calls at 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Two things. One, a correction. And this isn't anybody's here's fault exactly. Fox News literally mistyped this. I sent over an article this morning for us to write up. You know, Mark Milley, the testifying that we were going to be saying was going to be happening tomorrow. That's happening today.
Well, yeah, I thought it was today.
I thought it was today too. And then reading through the article, they were like Wednesday morning, and I was like, okay, no, it is today. That's going on today. I checked; they literally rewrote their article on this. Anyway, to bring people up to speed with what we're talking about, Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington D.C. Is going to be the site of testimony from U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley, and the U.S. Central Command's head general Kenneth McKenzie. They're all talking about the bungled withdrawal from Afghanistan, basically being taken to whatever task they're going to be taken to over this one. Grilled, so to speak, although we'll see what grilling actually gets done.
Yeah, I'm actually interested in that one.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that should be really, really interesting, especially Milley. I mean, considering the information that came out about the Trump administration and him talking to his Chinese counterparts and kind of having conversations with other Joint Chiefs of Staff, making a determination that, you know, any policy change is going to have to go through us, that type of stuff. So that should be really interesting. Republicans are probably going to be pretty vicious or brutal in this kind of conversation. But even just the Afghanistan thing by itself would have a certain degree of interest in what did Biden know? Was he up to date on what was taking place? Why did he get it so wrong? Yeah, he's going to have somewhat of a tough way to go on this. So it should be interesting.
He will, but God, man, I hope so. He's to blame for a lot of this stuff, but they are too. I hope that they don't just, well, it's not my fault, it's Biden's fault. I hope they don't pull that move.
It's like it's all on you. It's just the administration. We had nothing to do with this.
I hope that's, my voice broke. I hope that's not what the Republicans are pushing for either. If all they're trying to do is use this to bury Biden, I get that that's politically expedient to do so, but they should do that in addition to grilling these dudes over every mistake they made, because these guys are the people who ostensibly are supposed to be in charge of this stuff too, right? Yes. That's why they're testifying.
Well, they're supposed to be in charge of, I mean, Congress is supposed to declare wars, right? I mean, they're supposed to be the ones who are dealing with the purse strings with wars and everything else. And they've basically abdicated their responsibility for decades at this point. I mean,
Congress.
Congress. Whether it's under Obama with the bombing of Libya or the invasion of Syria, where they basically kept saying there's no boots on the ground, even though there were clearly boots on the ground. Even in many of those bombing campaigns where they would use the fig leaf of Iraq as a justification to go into other countries that weren't anywhere near Iraq. So yeah, Congress has basically abdicated its responsibility for war making.
Yeah, very, very interested to watch this one today.
Yeah.
Another quick one, because we didn't get to it. We had a guest where we're moving to tomorrow, I do believe. We're planning on talking about Julian Assange a little bit more, which we haven't really talked about today, based on this story released through Yahoo News on Sunday. Michael Isikoff and a few others released this story. Basically, the CIA was planning to kill/kidnap Julian Assange which on the one hand is shocking, on the other hand kind of isn't shocking. That's actually, for me personally, that's the kind of thing the CIA does. The fact that they're willing to do that to Julian Assange, that they're talking about that, that's not too big of a surprise. But it's good to get the facts out, and it's always good to learn more about what exactly is being said, is being thought, the kinds of conversations being had. And heads up, assuming we can get to this tomorrow, one angle on this that I'm very interested in, that we were talking about yesterday, Jamarl. So, you know, NSO Group with its Pegasus malware service that was being used, basically, it's like a mercenary cyber malware hacking outfit.
Basically attacking journalists and you know.
Breaking into their phones. You don't even need to click a link, but usually, you know, you send people a text and then you have access to their phone. I don't understand technically how they're doing that. Hopefully Apple would have better defenses, but basically taking advantage of zero-day exploits that Apple hasn't been able to predict, you know, new stuff. Anyway, that kind of thing. So put that in your head. Then think about for a second about the biometric database that the Taliban managed to seize because it was basically left behind in Afghanistan. And they can use that to figure out, okay, who is the U.S. working with theoretically, track those people down and kill them. Both of these cases, I would argue, are two instances of a much broader problem. It's an interesting conversation to have we should come back to tomorrow, which is these services are being created. Our intelligence community is creating these massive weapons. They're becoming a behemoth, but they're also creating weapons. And then when scrutiny comes in, when you get journalists like Julian Assange or Daniel Hell or John Kiriakou, I get some of this is a bit further afield, but broadly speaking, when our intelligence community is scrutinized and people are critical of it, those voices are suppressed, they're pushed out, they're literally, people talk about killing them. And what does that mean? First of all, it's a moral tragedy on a high level, but also it means that these institutions don't lack self-awareness. They don't scrutinize themselves. They don't have that mirror to look into of like, wait, this is what we're doing, that kind of thing. And so you get this downward spiral where they create ever more dangerous weapons that they can't control, that other parties, their enemies, our enemies, etc., can use. Just dangerous people, dangerous groups. You get my point.
And that's the part. They can't control it. I mean, Vault 7, you know, that was one of the things that came up as part of a justification for them trying to kill or capture. And, you know, it became clear that once the stuff was out, it was out. You know, it wasn't something that only us had access to. So yeah, that should be very interesting.
Just pitching that conversation. We should come back to it at some point. And we've got callers, 202-521-1320. Go to Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
How y'all doing? Thanks for taking my call. I got two comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Danziger, enhance all of Haiti. The timing, my first comment, the timing of the story that was leaked, it was leaked over the weekend. I had a whole bunch of leaders from around the world that was here. And I'm pretty sure they saw this story too. You know, what was going on with the Julian Assange case with Mike Pompeo. And also it was leaked before also the court hearings, which I think you might have more information might be coming out, hopefully, to go along with that story to help out Julian Assange. Mike Pompeo, also with the story, Mike Pompeo was on the Glenn Beck show yesterday, and I saw him talking about, you know, WikiLeaks Julian Assange being a non-state hostile actor, basically trying to, you know, steal secrets and things like that, you know, treating them as if they're hackers, you know, talking about if they're hackers. And basically he was lying because it was already proven that WikiLeaks, you know, Julian Assange did not hack, you know, the government. It was people that gave him phones. My last comment is dealing with this cell I found out is a artificial cell that they're developing in the labs that could one day fight diseases and viruses. It's acting as a living cell, but it's not actually a living cell, and it can absorb bacteria like E. coli and don't release the E. coli. And it can absorb good cells and release good cells. It is a video on it with this guy. I might have to link it to y'all so y'all can see it. But I'll link the article to y'all site for today, and I sent it to the DM on the Fort Lines Radio where y'all can read it. So it's pretty insightful, man. It's revolutionary. So you can build on them cells too. So yeah, that's all I wanted.
That is pretty revolutionary. That's pretty controversial. I'll get my take on that. Jamarl, what do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. The artificial cell thing, it's like not alive, but it mimics some of the features of a cell. I didn't get the opportunity to go further into the details on it, but I do remember the story. I do remember reading over it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess, that stuff is always outcome, what takes place after the fact. If it proliferates, it's just interesting. I don't know enough about around it of what they're using it or capabilities and everything else to have a hard opinion one way or the other on it.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to guests. Let's go to callers. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Malik, calling in from D.C., talking about the vaccines and NYC. What's on your mind, Malik?
Hey, good morning, guys. I appreciate you taking my call. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Wanted to relay something that I experienced this past weekend that has to do with the mandates. I had to rush a close friend to the emergency room because of a cardiac event. She ended up having to sit in the emergency room for roughly 7.5 hours. But while she was waiting, she was there with another gentleman, an older Indian gentleman, who also had a cardiac event. And he actually went into cardiac arrest while he was waiting. And these are the things, these are, the gridlocks that we're going to witness and we are witnessing in our society because of these mandates. And here's the thing, from my perspective, these things had to be predicted. And so what it leads me to believe that it's deliberate. And then, and as this coincides, we're seeing many kind of miniature food riots happening. The NYPD
I saw that.
And to break up an organization, anti-fascist organization that was giving food not to homeless people but to working people.
Yeah.
And the same thing has happened in Portland and around the country. So we're seeing a gridlock across the board in our society.
Malik, let me ask you this. Do you think that any of it has to do with people not getting vaccinated and basically slamming in the hospitals and ERs and using up supplies and everything else? Meaning the overwhelming majority, I think it was like 90 to 95% of the people who are ending up in the ERs or, for that matter, ICUs were unvaccinated. Even if people go with this notion that, okay, well, vaccines are only helping the individual to avoid serious death. Okay, fair enough. But let's be clear that part of the reason that these sticking points, so that's 7 hours, was because a ton of unvaccinated people crowding the hospitals and ICUs. If it wasn't for that, your friend might have been able to actually get health care sooner. Do you accept that?
Jamal, I'll tell you the reason, a very quick reason why I don't accept that. One, I currently don't have health care. So if I have to deal with a health issue, oftentimes I have to go to the ER. Mm-hmm. And I was there with her. So I'm looking at the people who are in the emergency room as well, and I'm witnessing it myself. These were not COVID patients, and I've actually shown up in emergency rooms with hospitals that, once you get back to be treated, there's barely anybody there. So I'm not saying that people are not suffering from COVID, but I'm also reading articles like the articles out of Massachusetts and out of certain universities that the vast majority of the COVID cases in several places and in several hospitals are the vaccinated. And so, I would ask you to at least admit that there's contradicting information to what you're saying.
I would say that there are going to be places that have a lot of people who are vaccinated who end up in the hospital, just especially if most of the people in a particular area are vaccinated. But let's be clear, the huge thing from the standpoint of either deaths or major illness were unvaccinated. When they're talking about the morgues having to bring in refrigerator trucks, or when they're talking about ICUs being full or running out of supplies, they're talking about it for people who basically decided not to get vaccinated.
Sounds like we're out of time. Sad to say the music has come on. Malik, thank you for the call. We've got to close this show out. I want to thank everybody for calling in. I want to thank everybody for listening to this morning show. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you, Engineer Andre. Thank you, producers Austin and Cordell. Thank you, Jamarl Thomas. And thank you, that is you once again, for listening to this morning show. We'll be signing off, coming back tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern. This beautiful Wednesday, September 29th tomorrow. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you on the other side.